Hey guys, welcome to part 7 of What If Naruto Was Adopted by Aruka. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 25. Believe. It was unseasonably warm for early November, although the weather had been fairly erratic ever since the battle between the Biju. The sky was a clear blue, allowing the sun to bear down on the jagged rocks and boulders at the base of the great cliff. The forest wasn't far off, less than 50 meters from the cliff face, and it resonated with the cacophony of innumerable cicadas. The call of a sparrow hawk mixed in at irregular intervals, along with the frightened chirps of its prey. All in all, the scene was something more fitting for the middle of summer, but it was becoming all too familiar for two genin in particular. Sasuke slumped down at the base of a tree, grateful for its shade. He wiped at the sweat coating his brow, grimacing a second later when he realized that he had just trailed dirt and dust across his face. It matched the rest of him, at least. His black attire was thoroughly coated in a layer of the same filth, but it didn't really bother him anymore. It was something that he and Hinata had gotten used to. We've covered this area with a fine-toothed comb for kilometers in every direction, Sasuke sighed, shaking his head tiredly. Twice. I think we should move further out. In a minute, Hinata called back. She stood atop a huge boulder, her features set in concentration. Her clothes were similarly grimy, especially noticeable on the cream-colored skirt where dirt had been smudged and ground into the fabric. She pivoted in place after a few seconds' stillness, her back knee hitting the ground as her palm thrust towards the stone underfoot. The movement ended in a lunge as the heel of her hand struck the rock, and for a moment it seemed as if nothing had happened. A few seconds later, however, there was a tremendous groan beneath her feet, followed by a thunderous crack that could have passed for a nearby storm. Cracks streaked out from her hand, creating a chaotic network of razor-thin fissures that spread at least a half-dozen meters in every direction. No violent explosion followed. The massive stone simply crumbled and fell into thousands of tiny chunks. Hinata kept her balance on a small piece, riding it down into the crevasse left behind from the strike. You good? Called Sasuke, squinting into the haze of unsettled debris. Fine, she replied, her voice tight and thick with exhaustion. I don't even know what I'm looking for at this point. The young Hyuga's form became visible a moment later, at first just a blur beyond the dust. Sasuke could see the fatigue expressed in her body language, from her downtrodden features to her lethargic movements around the fragments of rock. He frowned. You could have just used your Byakugan on that one, he started as she approached. I know you've already used it a lot today, but. He trailed off, shrugging. You already look pretty tired. I just felt like breaking that one, she replied dully, sinking down next to him and leaning her head back against the tree trunk. Her eyes closed, and she took a deep breath of the silt-free air. It's just. I know. Sasuke averted his gaze for a moment when she swallowed and nodded. The situation was beyond words at that point, and they had suffered the conversation too many times now. We'll find him, no matter how long it takes. Hinata nodded again, and he pretended not to see her, swiping the tears from the corners of her eyes. I know. It's just hard to look every day and not find a trace of him anywhere. She nodded towards the cliff, wincing once and touching the back of her head. As far as we know, he transported me using the Hiraishin practice jutsu, and then never came back. Her eyes scanned around, bleakly examining their surroundings as the dust cleared away. He would have landed around here, too. Even if he were dead, we'd at least have. Have what? Sasuke interjected, his tone hard and somewhat impatient. Closure. Come on, Hinata. Neither you nor I would get anything out of finding him dead except a lot of pain and anger. If he used the Hiraishin like we think he did, then he might still be alive. Hinata recoiled slightly, and he immediately regretted being so harsh. It had been difficult for both of them, but she had taken it harder than anybody, and he couldn't blame her for that. He put a hand over hers and squeezed, trying for a soft smile. I'd rather spend my life hoping that he's still alive and searching rather than sinking into despair and believing him dead. Tsunade-sama gave us indefinite leave in order to find him, and I intend to use it. What about you? Several minutes passed in silence, and only after several more did Hinata finally squeeze his hand back, albeit weakly. Me too, she said quietly, her eyes becoming unfocused as she stared off towards the cliff. It doesn't make it hurt less, though. I just wonder how long it will take for me to stop hoping that I'll see him around the next corner. Sasuke couldn't really respond to that with anything that might help. Eventually their searches might become mechanical, the hope that they would find their friend alive long since gone. But that wasn't a reason to give up. As long as there was a chance, they would stubbornly forge ahead. I'm just glad. She stopped and shook her head, and for the first time in weeks a small smile seemed to be tugging at her lips. It was a sad, almost invisible thing, but it was there nonetheless. I'm glad I got to tell him. Sasuke understood without her having to finish. It was a much different situation from when last she thought Naruto dead, and he found himself wondering what that said about her. Was that just a part of living as a shinobi, getting used to friends dying? Would it eventually become just a brief ache, one that passed almost as quickly as it came? He had to suppress a shiver at the thought. Let's go meet up with Neji and Tenten, and maybe get something to eat. I'm willing to bet that you didn't eat breakfast again. Hinata pursed her lips and seemed like she wanted to protest, but after a few seconds she only shrugged and pushed herself to her feet. She took off before he could stand, and he was left staring after her retreating silhouette as she vanished into the trees. He ran his fingers back through his hair, tugging in frustration at a few knots created by the morning's fruitless search. Sasuke kicked off the ground, bounding after his friend and doing his best to ignore the pang in his chest that never seemed to go away. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Pain blossomed across Naruto's face as it struck hard stone, and for the briefest instant he wondered if the Hiraishin had failed. But then, if it had, he wouldn't have been able to think at all. He yelped as he felt the heat beneath his cheek, jumping up to gain his feet. He reached up to touch the left side of his face and found it warm to the touch, the skin there a bit tender. And that was when he began to notice his surroundings, a knot forming in the pit of his stomach as he took everything in. He stood staring down into the smoking crater of a volcano, mere centimeters from the edge of the rim. The far sides of the chasm were lost to sight. It must have been several kilometers in diameter at least. A slow turn revealed that it was dark in all directions, as far as the eye could see. Black ash hung in the sky like thick clouds, blocking out any sunlight that might have been trying to penetrate it. Most of the ambient illumination came from lava flows that dotted the landscape all around. The air smelled of earth and sulfur, and taking regular breaths was difficult in the stifling heat. So, we're alive. It took several minutes of wide-eyed observation to get that out, and then several long seconds to receive a response. Due only to luck, Kurama grunted, observing their surroundings through Naruto's eyes. You've landed us atop Mount Hyuchi, almost in it. You've been here before. Naruto coughed and went to cover his mouth and nose with his coat's high collar, only to find that it wasn't there. Oh, right, left it at the training ground. Crap. He supposed that was a good thing, considering the heat. He felt weak, almost completely drained of chakra after transporting Hinata away and using the Hiraishin. He reached up to untie and unfold his scarlet headband, pulling it over his nose and mouth like a makeshift mask against the acrid air. I was not free to roam the land for long, but I had traveled most of the fire country before I was sealed. This is a venerable volcano, one that predates your species altogether, and its tenant is even older still. Tenant? You mean somebody lives in there? And how do you know this stuff anyway? You're not that old. Because I met the ancient fire once, and he is one of the few beings that I hold in high regard. This is his domain, and you have stumbled into it like a blind kit. I suggest you depart quickly, lest you wish to flirt with death another time this day. Can you at least tell me who this ancient fire guy is, and why he lives in a volcano? Naruto huffed, turning from the crater to start making his way down the steep slope. Before he could make it more than a few steps, and before Kurama could reply, the ground began to tremble. The rock all around the mountaintop seemed to expand outward, as if under a great pressure from within, and foul-smelling steam burst from the many cracks between the bulging stones. The temperature began to rise rapidly, and the oppressive heat made him feel feverish. It was all he could do to keep his feet as he turned to find the plume of smoke rising from the caldera that crackled with innumerable sparks, illuminated by the bright reds and oranges of the lava writhing far below. I guess it's too late, the QB sighed. Try to die quickly, if you don't mind. Wait, what's going on? I'm not about to die just after using my dad's jutsu. It all seemed pretty unfair. When did he get a break? Orochimaru attacked in the Forest of Death. Suna and the Aikibi assaulted Konoha at the tail end of the Chunin exam. Almost immediately after recovering, he had been chased down by Akatsuki. Then Gara came back for round 2. Orochimaru's henchmen kidnapped them straight after that, and now in the same day he had accidentally transported himself to a volcano that was home to something very old and very dangerous. Something may have snapped within Naruto then. His anxious expression hardened and his jaw set, his features twisting into a snarl. He took a step towards the roiling volcano's crest, stomping his foot down on the rock and bellowing his half-crazed defiance. If he was about to die again, then he might as well get a word in this time. Bring it on then. I didn't come here on purpose, but if you wanna fight then you'd better be ready to throw down. I'm not scared of you and your stupid volcano, old man. Strangely enough, the ground stopped shaking then, and the sparks shooting from rising smoke died away. Naruto blinked. Did I scare him away? Fire, lava, and molten rock exploded out of the crater and into the sky, and it was only the shock of the explosion that saved Naruto from getting burnt to a crisp. He fell back with cry of surprise, tumbling down the slope several meters until he managed to slide to a panicked stop. He was on his feet in an instant, eyes darting around and trying to keep track of every piece of deadly debris coming his way. Several tense seconds passed as he dashed from side to side and up and down the mountainside, desperately trying to avoid being struck. A stream of lava whipped past his head, missing by less than a meter and nearly setting his hair ablaze. A boulder nearly as tall as he was came bouncing wildly down, forcing him to leap over it and twist midair to avoid being hit by 2 glowing shards of rock. It wasn't until he had landed from that maneuver that he realized that there was a rumbling noise nearby, very nearby. It was coming from inside his own head. Are you laughing? He asked incredulously, ducking another rock the size of his fist. Kurama's deep chuckling continued, heedless of Naruto's indignation. He probably would have verbally ripped the fox a new one if his eyes hadn't fallen on the mouth of the caldera again. Instead, his jaw dropped open. Something was rising out of the magma, which had already reached the rim and now threatened to cascade down the side of the volcano. Whatever was emerging, it was huge, Biju-sized, even. At first it was just an amorphous shape drenched in lava, but when Naruto realized how it was carrying itself upward he was able to start picking out bits of familiar anatomy. There was a head there definitely, though it was still completely covered in liquid fire. Out to either side and spanning nearly the entirety of the crater was a pair of colossal wings, beating slowly and sending more molten rubble flying with every downstroke. The last things to rise were the creature's talons, the claws of which longer than Naruto was tall, every deadly point dripping slag. I changed my mind. Naruto thought weakly. He was still staring at the thing, now clearly identifiable as a giant bird that was mostly composed of fire. The lava had finished flowing away from it now, revealing plumage that flickered and burned in a near-blinding display of color ranging from the deepest greens to the brightest reds. The bends of its wings were nearly black, but each new layer of feather transitioned gradually through the heat spectrum. From the dark blue of its scapulars, the plumage flowed smoothly to amethyst, the purest white, brilliant yellow, rich orange, and finally ending at the primary feathers with a vibrant crimson. Its body was a sunburst of organic flame, spreading from an alabaster breast into warm hues of burnt sienna. Its tail was longer than what would be found on a normal bird, like that of a peacock, the colors of which reflecting those in its wings. A pair of luminous golden eyes stared down at Naruto over a dangerously hooked beak, although they seemed to be intrigued rather than angry as expected. Kurama, died thou placest the youngling unto this? The ancient fire alighted on the crater's edge as it spoke, its voice coming into being from everywhere and nowhere. The mountain trembled again as he landed, although it seemed to be in response to his voice rather more than anything else. In fact, not so much as a pebble was misplaced by the gargantuan bird. His voice was deep and resonant like the Kyuubi's, but it was much calmer, more dignified, and held none of the ire that Kurama's did. The phrase you're looking for is, put him up to this, and I did not, old friend, the fox said in a bark of booming amusement. Then why doth he looketh frightened so? I may have led him to think that you were going to kill him. You would have to know him to understand why. This little cretin never ceases to annoy me. Thou hast not changed, hast thee, little one? Kurama glowered within his mindscape prison, but surprisingly offered no retort. While the two were talking, inside of his mind, apparently, Naruto simply stood gawking. The lava had receded after the ancient fire had fully emerged, and everything seemed to be settling down again. Now he was just standing a few meters away, staring wide-eyed up at a firebird whose full height could nearly have reached Kurama's back if they were to stand together. He supposed that he probably did look pale and unnerved, and who wouldn't? It took him a few seconds to shake himself out of the stupor and interrupt the conversation. Yeah, Kurama's always been an ass. But so, you're not going to kill me. It was hard to tell, but Naruto could have sworn that he saw a flicker of amusement on the bird's features. He felt it more than saw it, at any rate. Nay, child, thou hast defied death once. Who would I be to tempt fate's hand a second time? You know about that? Naruto asked aloud, deciding that it was getting a little crowded inside his head. He was having a hard time figuring out what was being said, too, but he did his best to listen and try to understand. What? Who are you? He corrected, not wanting to offend the being so soon after being granted clemency. He silently thanked Aruka for teaching him manners. The answer to both who and also what I am are one and the same, and yet they are as different as the sun and the moon, he responded cryptically, eyes glimmering in the light put off by his feathers. My names are many, although most refereth only to what I am, but some hinteth at more. Through thine epics, the ancient fire was most widely used. Eternal flame, guardian of time, keeper of secrets, the ageless one. Many were the titles bestowed upon me, all of which holdeth truth, yet none of which ringeth true. You lost him, Kurama sighed. All of his names mean different things, he continued by way of explanation, and they describe different parts of who he is, but none of them really tell his real name or what kind of being he is. Right. The eternal flame slowly cocked his head to one side, considering the explanation for a moment before nodding approvingly. The kitsune speaketh truth. Okay. So, Naruto started, rubbing irritably at the back of his neck. His head was starting to hurt, both from the multiple conversations going on and from trying to understand what was being said. You have a lot of names you go by, but what is your real name? And if none of those tell me what you are, then what are you exactly? The ancient fire straightened his head, then tilted it to the other side. And then he smiled. It was an impossible gesture to perceive just by looking at the bird, seeing as its beak was fairly inexpressive, but Naruto could suddenly feel a profound and genuine warmth spreading through him that was unmistakable for anything other than joy. I am known as a phoenix in thy tongue, and my true name is Fong. I have been waiting for thee, Uzumaki Naruto. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. That takes care of these areas, Tenten murmured, reaching over to mark off locations on the large map spread across the table. To either side of her sat Lee and Neji, and across from them Hinata, Sasuke, and Haku watched as she took a compass and drew a wide circle around a dot labeled as Konoha. On the inside of that circle were other smaller ones, shrinking in size until they reached the village marker. So we've covered almost 80 kilometers around the village in every direction, give or take a few hundred meters. We're making pretty good progress. She looked up with her smile only to find the gesture lost on her friends. Sasuke had his arms crossed and was staring out the window. Hinata's gaze was distant and somewhat vacant, unfocused somewhere past Neji's left shoulder. Haku merely chewed on his lip and watched his companions with no small amount of worry written plainly on his features. Yash. Lee agreed, pumping his fist into the air. We'll find Naruto-kun in no time. Hinata blinked out of her reverie at the mention of his name, but only to offer a weak smile before glancing down at the map. That means it's taken us nearly 3 weeks to search a radius of 80 meters, which means about 20,000 square kilometers. She asked, and Tenten nodded reluctantly after a moment to confirm the math. Fire country is estimated to be near 800,000 square kilometers, so if we maintain our pace then we'll have searched the whole country in 2 years and 3 months, give or take. Lee frowned at that, as did Tenten, though Neji's features betrayed nothing as he joined Sasuke in his task of examining the window. If you add in the surrounding countries, let alone the rest of the world, it means. It means what? Haku asked before Sasuke's mouth could get halfway open to reply. The older boy seemed apprehensive to speak, but as he continued his voice grew stronger and more confident. It means that it'll take 10 years. 20. 50. Hinata only shrugged, continuing to look down at the barely traversed map of the ninja world. Our whole lives. Are you implying that it's not worth it to find a person that's precious to you? Haku. Sasuke started, wincing at his friend's fervor. Haku's teeth clacked shut immediately. He knew that cautionary tone. But it was too late to take it back now. This had come up several times before already, and they all knew how Hinata felt. It's not a matter of worth, Hinata said quietly, not looking up. It's just about accepting reality. I know you all want to keep searching, that you think it'll help us have hope or come to terms with what's happened. But I. She stopped, closing her eyes for a moment to will away the stutter threatening to invade her speech. I knew going in what could happen, and I knew it from experience. I knew that, every time we got a new mission, one of us might not come back. I knew that, and so did Naruto. We don't need to keep doing this, she continued in the same muted tone. If he is alive, and I will always hope that he is, then nothing will stop him from coming home to us. Nothing. It was a painful mixture of resignation, despair, and insincere optimism, and no one could say a word in response. Hinata stood in the silence, offered a little bow and a mumbled apology, then turned and walked out. The 5 remaining watched after her, their sorrowful expressions feeling all too familiar as of late. It hurt to see her like that, but there was almost nothing they could do for her now. I'm going to walk her home, Sasuke sighed after a few seconds, sliding his chair back and nodding to his friends. See if you all can come up with a better strategy in the meantime. Jiraiya-sensei said that improperly used space-time ninjutsu can transport the user somewhere relevant to them, so see if you can find places like that. Whirlpool Country might be a good place to start that list, but just use what Hinata and I compiled about Naruto to see if you can think of others. Tenten gave him a dubious look, but nodded and pulled a stack of papers from a bag hanging on her chair. Sasuke nodded again, thanked the others, and departed after Hinata. I don't need you to console me, Hinata said as Sasuke approached. I'm fine. You're not fine, so don't pretend like you are, he muttered, falling into step beside her. The setting sun had done a fair job at clearing the streets, although it was only a matter of time before the night crowd started to take over. The restaurant they had been in, Shushuya, had become a place of meeting for their group ever since Naruto's disappearance. It was the kind of establishment that drew older crowds that enjoyed their sake, but subsequently was pretty quiet until the evening hours when the heavy drinkers came around. Tsunade went there to check up on them, every once in a while, apparently able to run off for a drink here and there despite her new duties as the Hokage. I am fine, Hinata gently insisted, keeping her eyes down. I'm not doing well, Sasuke, but I'm okay. Naruto and I didn't leave anything unsaid this time, and I've been preparing myself for this ever since the Chunin exam. It's part of who we are and the path we chose to walk, the same as it is for you. They just want to help, Sasuke put in after a minute, scrounging around for something to say. They're all just worried about us, about you especially. I've sort of been around the block with this kind of thing. No amount of preparing is going to make it stop hurting, Hinata. It was her turn to wince, and he did his best to soften his tone as they stopped outside of the apartment complex. He turned to her and put a hand on her shoulder, waiting for a few seconds until she reluctantly met his eyes. It's not going to go away. You wouldn't be human if it did. But we're here for you, just like you and Naruto were there for me back then. A very long 30 seconds passed with hardly a twitch from either of them, and Sasuke had expected little else. Outside of simply being withdrawn, Hinata hadn't shown a shred of anything that one might expect from a tragic loss. She hadn't been angry, not at herself, Naruto, Her friends, anybody. It was obvious that she was carrying a weight around, but she hadn't even shown real sorrow. Tenten had a good cry or two, and Lee had shed a few tears during a passionate speech, but not Hinata. She hadn't been anything in the last few weeks. She walked around with hardly a sign of vitality within her, and any expression she offered seemed forced. It was like she was in shock. Only it wasn't that at all. She had simply chosen not to feel. Very slowly, in a movement that seemed almost dreamlike, Hinata took a step forward to close the distance between them. Her features betrayed nothing, but Sasuke could feel her shaking the moment her arms circled his waist. He blinked in awkward surprise at first, not sure how to react. He'd hugged her once or twice over the years, so it wasn't as if the action was new. But he had never been the one to comfort her, to give her a shoulder to cry on when she was hurting, and he had never embraced her like this while trying to soothe the pain away. But he had also meant it when he said that he was there for her. Sasuke moved his arms to wrap around her, holding on in a fierce yet gentle gesture, perhaps more the former than the latter. Thank you, Hinata said in a small, fragile voice. She bit her lip and closed her eyes, then took in a steadying breath. It'll take a while, but I'll really be okay eventually. I promise. I will be. No matter how many times she told herself that, it never seemed to get any truer. Hinata closed the door to the apartment behind her, listening to the sounds coming from the kitchen where Aruka was cooking dinner. It had only been a week since they had moved into the new place, and everything was already put in its place. The kitchen was just off of the entry hall on the left, complete with a small dining area and an adjoining den that served as a living room. There was a small bathroom straight ahead as she entered, though its use was largely reserved for guests. Down the hall on her right were their bedrooms, with Aruka's master suite at the end on the left. A linen closet occupied the left wall of the hallway as well, and opposite it were two more bedrooms and a full bathroom between. It was their new apartment, and it was larger than the previous one, but it hadn't felt like home yet. She wasn't sure if it ever would. Hey Hinata. Aruka greeted her warmly as she entered. He tossed a colander filled with steaming noodles a few times before emptying it into a sizzling wok, wafting the scent of various spices through the kitchen. You're just in time. The yakisoba is almost ready. Hinata tried her hand at a smile in response, and Aruka took it in stride. He continued where he had left off in humming nothing in particular, and in no time Hinata had cleaned up and gotten the table set for them to sit down to eat. Itadakimasu, they said in unison, Aruka's jovial tone a fair bit louder than Hinata's subdued voice. The meal was simple and finished quickly enough, only occasionally disturbed by his occasional mentions about how the day at the academy had gone. He didn't push her to speak. He never did. Aruka-sensei. Hinata started, placing the last dish on a rack to dry before continuing. How do you do it? Do what? He blinked a few times, giving the impression that he was genuinely oblivious towards the purpose of her inquiry, even if that wasn't the case. She chewed absently at her lower lip, trying to find the right words. Aruka waited patiently. He knew what question was coming. It had only been a matter of time. How can you be so lighthearted when Naruto's not here? She asked, almost tripping over a few words in her rush to get them out. He's not. It's not. It doesn't seem right, does it? He queried, the corners of his lips tugging up into a somber smirk. He was quiet for a few seconds before rising from the table and setting a clay kettle on the stove. Would you join me for some tea in the living room? Hinata blinked, and he shrugged. We haven't really had a good talk in a while, and tea always goes well with conversation. She nodded then, and with a little coaxing Aruka got her to go sit down while he waited on the water to boil. In short order Aruka joined her on their old sofa, the same one that had served as Naruto's bed for so many months. He offered her one of the two steaming mugs of green tea, each with a spoonful of honey, of course. They sat for a short while in silence, sipping at their drinks before they had a chance to cool too much. I don't really have a good answer for you, Aruka replied at last, unable to keep himself from chuckling at that. I've been asking myself that question for weeks now, and I've come up with a few ideas, but no real definitive answers. The thing is, it just doesn't feel like Naruto's dead. He stopped for a moment, like he was digesting his own words before going on. I've known him since he was young, and I've taken responsibility for him since he was 6 years old. I'm the closest thing he's ever had to a real, living parent, and well, I can't really explain why, but I just don't feel like he's really gone. I don't understand, Hinata said quietly, staring down into her half-empty cup. Neither do I, Aruka admitted with a laugh, rubbing at the back of his neck with his free hand. Hinata looked up, and couldn't help but notice how similar he and Naruto looked when they did that. I guess as his surrogate father, I feel like I would simply know if he had died, like I would feel it somehow. He shrugged again and took another sip of his drink, looking pensive. Maybe that's unreasonable, but it's what I have. Deep down, I feel that he's still alive, and that he'll come back to us. It's why I can wake up every day and smile, and why I can still laugh and try to enjoy life as best I can while he's away. At the end of the day, I'd rather always believe that he's alive, and in the meantime remember the years of joy and hardships with him. There are other reasons, of course, he sighed, swirling the tea in his cup. Ones that are more practical, I suppose. I'm sure you've noticed that Sasuke seems mostly normal. He may be profoundly upset and hurting, but outwardly he's the same friend you've known for years, isn't he? Hinata nodded, wondering what he was getting at. It sounds cold to say, but it gets easier as time goes on. Losing people you love, I mean. You'll always feel the same amount of pain, but you'll learn how to manage it better, and you learn how to keep being yourself. You have to, or the pain will end up driving you mad. She looked away at that, going back to biting her lower lip and willing herself not to give in to the tears. These always help me, Aruka went on, setting his mug down on the low wooden table by the couch. He reached for a drawer set in the table's side, and he pulled it open to reveal a stack of photographs. I started taking pictures as a hobby maybe a year after Naruto came to live with me. These are the memories I have to go back to whenever I get sad, because they help me remember what kind of person Naruto is, and how terribly he might scold me if he finds out I was getting down about something silly. Hinata took the photos tentatively, beginning to go through them with fingers that she pretended were not shaking. Before long, however, she found herself smiling and giggling for the first time since Naruto's disappearance. Unsurprisingly, every picture was either of Naruto or one with him in it, and he was wearing his familiar broad grin in most of them. They didn't seem to be in any particular order. She flipped from one of 7-year-old Naruto enjoying a bowl of homemade ramen to the next with him sparring shirtless with Sasuke. There was a picture for everything he loved, from ramen to training to watering plants to her. This is, she breathed, coming to the last photograph in the stack. Tears welled up without warning, but she found herself smiling despite them. The final picture was of the two of them, lying fast asleep on the very couch she was currently seated on. Hinata's back was up against Naruto's chest, one of his arms hanging off the side of the sofa and serving as a pillow for her head. A soft green blanket covered them both just below the shoulders, but she could see where his arm circled her waist beneath it. His face was nuzzled into the nape of her neck as he slept, and she could clearly see his soft, sleepy smile through a few stray locks of her hair. Aruka must have woken during the night or very early in the morning to have sneaked that shot, and she was glad that he had. You can keep that one if you'd like, Aruka said gently. Despite that talk we had a few months back, I have to admit that you two always look cute when you fall asleep together. He felt a little guilty chuckling again, seeing as Hinata was doing her best not break down. She wiped at her eyes with the bandages on her arm, though a few tears managed to escape and patter down atop the glossy image in her hand. I know it's hard, Hinata, it has been for me, too. But never forget that you have people around you that love you, and that it's okay to rely on them from time to time. Above all else, never lose hope, and always choose to call upon those happy memories. I like to think it's what he'd like us to do while he's away. Hinata didn't say anything, and she couldn't have if she had the desire to. Aruka understood, and with a last little smile he retrieved her mug and left her to her own thoughts. He had said his piece, and it was up to her to decide what to do with it. She sat there for a long time, holding that picture to her chest with her eyes closed, just thinking. She knew that the way she had been handling everything wasn't healthy. After Naruto had definitively died during the Chunin exam, Hinata had sworn to herself that she would steel herself against that trauma. She had vowed not to be in denial if it ever happened again, to go through life with no regrets so that she could handle it. But no matter how fervently she told herself that, and no matter to what degree she was convinced that it was the right thing to do, she just couldn't do it. Even the thought of it hurt too much, and maybe that was why Aruka was so confident in the idea that Naruto was alive and well. Maybe he had to be. She had thought herself strong, that she had been handling Naruto's presumed death in a reasonable manner with poise and dignity. In reality, all she had done was bury it deep inside, bottled up while every day the throes built upon one another. Maybe it was time she let herself feel that pain of loss, and replace all of the hurt with the hope everybody was trying to give her. Some time later Hinata finally rose from her seat. She had briefly considered sleeping there, but it just didn't feel right without Naruto. Instead she tugged the green blanket from where it hung over the back of the couch, pulling it around herself and stepping slowly from the room and out of the den and kitchen areas. She moved silently down the hall, passing the first two doors on her right to arrive at the last. Aruka's bedroom was across the hall on the left side, and hers was the first on the right. She took a deep, trembling breath before turning the doorknob and slipping inside. The bedroom looked almost identical to Naruto's old one, at least before she had started living there. It was substantially cleaner and more organized than it might have been if he were there, however. His full bed was nestled in the corner opposite the doorway, right up against a wide curtained window. A bedside table with a lamp, a dresser filled with his clothes, and a large wardrobe filled to bursting with his equipment completed the room's furnishings, discounting the set of weights at the foot of the bed. A few knickknacks topped dresser. They were mostly just things from his youth, such as the shuriken he had scored his first bullseye with. The nightstand held a fair number of pictures, the closest to the bed being a picture of Hinata in the dark kimono she had worn to Haku's trial. There was another with Naruto and Sasuke fist bumping, another of their team with Kakashi, and another with Iruka and Naruto. Those photographs made her smile as well. It was the first time she had seen them since moving in. Hinata slid up onto the familiar bed and curled atop the comforter, pulling the green blanket around her. She closed her eyes, pressed the picture to her chest, and began to cry. At first the tears were silent, but before long they turned into full sobs that racked her diminutive form with every bit of sorrow she had been holding in. She wept for what felt like hours, allowing the tears to flow until there were none left to fall. Ever so slowly, and without even realizing it herself, Hinata drifted off into a deep slumber. It was the beginning of her first peaceful sleep in over a fortnight. Across the hall, unseen and unheard, Aruka stared at his ceiling with distant eyes. This evening's tears had long since come and gone, leaving long stains trailing down each side of his face. Naruto. Please, come back to us. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. So let me get this straight, Naruto muttered, massaging his temples. You're a phoenix, and have been alive for ever. You don't remember how old you are. I have lived and perished many a time, and mine existence dates to before mine own recollection. It is possible that I have always been. Right. Got it. I think. He didn't really understand. How could something have just always existed? Everything had to be born or created somehow. Maybe the old bird just had a bad memory. But why were you waiting for me, and what's so important that I need to stay here for it? I need to get back to my village. Fong titled his head to one side again, studying Naruto with his intense avian eyes. The blonde wanted to squirm under the scrutiny, but forced himself to remain still and seated. Precious few mortals may claim to have returned from the brink of death, and fewer still have crossed over and cometh to live once again. Thou art one that hath entered my domain, blurring a line that ought never to have been frayed but by me and mine. It was thy doing, Kurama, was it not? Partly. The fox shrugged. If he died, I would have gone with him, which would have been inconvenient. Not all of us get to rise from our own ashes so soon after dying. His allies played a part in his revival as well, however. What does me dying and being brought back have to do with you? It's not like I can do it every time I die. It was just dumb luck that I ever woke up, wasn't it? Be that so, mortal. Again Naruto had a feeling that the phoenix was smirking at him. It didn't help that he sounded like Kurama when he said, "Mortal, either. Consider again what I am, and mayhap it will become clear." "You're a phoenix," Naruto repeated, staring up at the massive creature with an expression that was a mixture of perplexity and impatience. "I get that me coming back from dying is sort of like what you can do, but I'm not immortal or anything. And that still doesn't answer why you were waiting for me or what you want me to do." Fong blinked twice, as if he had been expecting the answer to those questions to be obvious. "Youngling, a contract needs must be adhered to. Me and mine may have but one living contractor, and the last hast been deceased many centuries. He's saying," Kurama offered, "that, as you have died and been resurrected after a fashion, you have met the requirements to enter into a summoning contract." The QB's tone was one of genuine surprise, something that sounded rather disconcerting coming from him. It wasn't often that one could catch an immortal off guard. For his part, Naruto could only stare, his jaw hanging open unashamedly. He hadn't given the idea of summoning very much thought since his training with Jiraiya, mostly because it had seemed like Kurama wasn't a fan of toads. Now that he was privy to what had happened on the day of his birth, he couldn't exactly blame the fox either. Still, the thought had been far from his mind, and now it came crashing back with resounding effect. "You want," he started, feeling lightheaded again. "You want me to sign your contract." It made some amount of sense given Fang's explanation, but he was just a kid, a genin. It wasn't something he had ever looked up, but he was pretty sure that genin weren't normally trusted with things like that. Jiraiya might have some pull with the toads that could have made it happen, and Naruto also had Jonin-level chakra capacity to make it feasible, but he was likely an exception to the rule. He understood that Fong had a pretty limited pool of people to select from, but thou. It taketh considerable spirit and strength of will for a mortal to defy fate's designs, and I see that thou hast more valuable qualities than even those. Thy companions mean much to thee." Naruto blinked out of his daze and nodded, still muddling in disbelief from the whole situation. One second he had been plummeting from a cliff, and the next he was talking to a phoenix and being offered a contract because he'd died once a few months before. Was this how these things normally worked? "What do you think, Kurama? He can hear you, you know." "Shut up. I don't care. What do you think?" "I think you would be insane to turn him down. He is one of a handful of true immortals that I know of, and he's powerful. That's not to mention the knowledge that he possesses from the beginnings of what you mortals call time. I mean the real beginning, if there even was one." Okay, I got it. I just want to get this over with and start heading back to Konoha. You know where we are, so can you get us back?" Mount Hyuchi is at the northwest corner of Fire Country. Feng Sama's realm spans beyond these borders, even so far as the land of Earth. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that, and not just at Kurama referring to somebody so respectfully. He thought back on the world maps he had seen at the academy, and realized that the Phoenix's territory must stretch well over 100 kilometers in every direction, into and through 2 other countries on the way to the land of Earth. "All right, I'll do it." Feng nodded, and his beak lifted into what was undoubtedly a bird-like smile. "Huang, come forth." A light emerged from the feathers of his right wing, appearing as a tiny red dot to Naruto. As it descended, however, it proved to be another phoenix almost identical to Feng, although without the full spectrum of color in its plumage. This one was all the shades of a natural fire, in various reds throughout and points of white at the shoulders and breast. Once the little phoenix got closer, it was clear that it wasn't quite as small as Naruto had thought. It was the size of a large hawk, though its wingspan and tail were more impressive. In its talons hung a small scroll that looked as if it might crumble to dust at any moment, its edges singed black and cracking. "This is my daughter, Huang, born of my ashes at the time of my last awakening. The scroll she carries is the original, wrought by the first human ever to enter into a contract with me and mine. Sign, Uzumaki Naruto, so that we might become bound as ones who would spurn death itself." Huang alighted just in front of Naruto, bending to pluck the binding string of the scroll loose with her beak and allowing it to unravel. The ink contained within was faded and peeling, and there were only spaces for 5 names in total. 3 were taken already, the first of which covered in little more than a faint burgundy smear. The second space was taken up by a set of symbols that looked to be tiny images of various things. Naruto recognized a depiction of a valley in one, and of an owl in another. The final occupied area contained a definite signature of some kind, written using symbols that were close to modern-day script but still illegible. Under each supposed name was a set of fingerprints, presumably of the individual that had signed above them. Naruto took a deep breath, remembering what Jiraiya had told him about summoning contracts. He reached up and bit down on his right thumb, his sharp canines doing better than any knife could have in slicing through the skin. With deft strokes, and having to pause every second or third to make a new incision due to the wound closing, he spelled out his full name as precisely as he could manage under the circumstances. He had Aruka to thank for the end result being fairly neat, all things considered. He bit down on his thumb one last time before touching the tip of each finger to it, finally pressing them all down on the parchment just below his name. The blood ink shimmered the instant his hand withdrew, crimson flames bursting from every line and curve for only an instant before they vanished. His dried blood was left behind, looking all too fresh next to the ancient signatories beside it. It is done. Take thy leave from this place, and callest upon me shouldest thou desire mine assistance. There is yet much to discuss, but thy haste is known to me. Begone, and may we meet anon. Thank you, Fong-sama, Naruto said graciously, affording the Phoenix Lord a deep bow. I'll come back to talk after I make sure that my friends are okay, I promise. Why not just summon him? Kurama smirked. Shut up, Naruto grumbled, adding after a moment. Good point. Huang will serve as thy companion for as long as thou wishest it. Fare thee well, Uzumaki Naruto. And thee, Kurama. Until we meet again, old friend, Kurama intoned reverently. With that Naruto turned to face southeast, gathered himself, and took off down the side of the volcano. Huang took to a soundless flight, coming to glide easily by his side as he made towards the bottom of the slope. That seemed really strange, Naruto thought after a moment, sparing a glance for his new companion before continuing. Though contracts like that would be more serious, or at least more formal. Severity and formality are relative terms, Kurama shrugged. He was probably just glad to have somebody to hold his contract after so long. Naruto blinked. Why do you say that? Think about it, kid. If he's been alive for so long, yet has only had 3 people form a contract with him. Well, do the math. That's untold eons without being called for a purpose other than that which he creates for himself. Even immortals can get lonely, I expect. Is that so? Naruto grinned, and the implication had the Kyuubi scowling at him. Shut up and run faster. You can probably make it to Konoha by dawn if I help out a little, and don't think I'll lend a hand if you're being a brat. You'll never stop being an ass, and I'll never stop trying to get on your nerves. So you'd better get used to it and just help out, or I'll start singing and not stop until we get there. Kurama groaned in response, and the chakra cloak whipped up around Naruto a second later. The blonde laughed, and Huang tilted her head to one side and trilled a few melodious notes by way of serenading their party. Naruto winked at her, and the fox snorted in amusement. I think we'll get along just fine, Huang-sama. No words came to his mind like when Fong was speaking, but there was a definite ring of disagreement around the title he had used, and he somehow understood what she was saying. Okay then. Huang-san it is. Naruto sped through the night, a reddish blur alongside a similarly colored young phoenix. He raced across the desolate landscape of the ancient fire's domain, choosing to believe that everyone was still okay. Hinata. He grit his teeth and pushed himself to go faster, hoping against all hope that he had gotten her back safely. Where did I leave off the last time? Kurama asked after a while, keeping his tone purposefully ambivalent. Ah, yes, Kushina had just been kidnapped by shinobi from Kumogakure. It was in the dead of night, and although she was bound she managed to leave a trail of her own hair behind in hope that someone might follow. Naruto smiled. The Kyuubi was a pain in the ass a lot of the time, but every once in a while he could do something considerate. There was a long night of traveling ahead of them, but listening to stories about his parents would make the time fly by. I'm on my way. Wait for me. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Naruto stood atop the Hokage monument looking out over the village of Konoha, exhausted but glad to be back home. He had been confronted by an Anbu agent upon entering village territory, but despite her surprised reaction she had let him pass, at least after he had used some of Kurama's chakra to prove that it was him. It had taken most of the night and early morning to get back, and it had be somewhere near 3 or 4 in the morning by now. But I'm home, at least. His relief was short-lived, however. Something's not right, Kurama murmured. What do you mean? I haven't felt anything. It's not a feeling, kid. Just use your eyes and look closer at what you're standing on. Naruto blinked, and then peered down as the Kyuubi had suggested. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled and stood on end, and he suddenly felt very cold. I didn't think they could carve one of those in just a few days, he managed to say after a few seconds. Down to his left, set in the cliff next to the visage of Minato, was the unmistakable face of Lady Tsunade. There was no scaffolding to indicate that the project was ongoing. As far as he could tell, it had already been completed. They can't, unless they've gotten exponentially better at it in the last 13 years. It takes the craftsmen weeks to carve these likenesses. That Kunoichi earlier seemed far too perplexed, also. Maybe they did just get better at it, Naruto reasoned, shrugging it off as best he could. The village looked the same besides that, and maybe Tsunade had something to do with it. He didn't know much about her, at any rate. I'm going to stop by the tower since we're here, just to report in with Tsunade-sama. He quickly descended from his perch to the building just below, alighting on the roof just outside of the window to the Hokage's office. I guess she's taking her new job seriously. Tsunade was at her desk poring over an array of scrolls, apparently very intent on her work from what Naruto could tell. Her back was to him, however, so she may very well have been scowling. Deciding it was best to take the safe route, he didn't want to end up like Jiraiya. After all, he leapt down to the doors and entered, taking the stairs 3 at a time until he reached the proper floor. Another Anbu operative stood by the door to Tsunade's office, and as Naruto approached he drew his short sword and squared himself facing the blonde. State your identity, as well as your business with the Godime. Naruto stopped, then blinked at the masked man. Anyo. Uzumaki Naruto. And I just wanted to report to Tsunade-sama about what happened yesterday, and why it took so long for me to get back. It was the ANBU's turn to blink, or at least Naruto assumed he did. It was more of a balk than anything else, but it was clear that the man was confounded. Yesterday. His tone implied suspicion, and Naruto could only raise an inquisitive eyebrow. Uzumaki Naruto has been missing for some time, and is believed dead. Prove that you are the genuine article. Some time. I've been gone for less than 12 hours. Naruto huffed, but nevertheless he called the Kyuubi's cloak again as proof. The shroud sprang to life, and he pulled out enough to form the third tail before the guard straightened and nodded. That's proof enough. You may enter. He stood aside, and Naruto eyed him for a moment before allowing Kurama's chakra to fade. The blonde shrugged, stepped forward, and opened the door. It took you long enough to get back, Tsunade said wryly as soon as the door had closed behind Naruto. She hadn't looked up from her work, but Naruto figured that she would have felt his or Kurama's chakra already. Why does everybody keep saying that? Naruto began irritably, scowling at nothing in particular. I've only been gone for a few hours. Oh, and how'd you get your face put on the monument so fast? Was it some kind of jutsu? Tsunade froze in the middle of a pen stroke, and it was only then that Naruto believed something really was wrong. Her gaze lifted to see him standing there, looking tired but very much alive, with a large fiery bird perched contentedly on his shoulder. Her lips parted in a wordless question, closed again, then opened after a deep breath and a quick composing of herself. Naruto, you've been gone for 3 weeks. Sasuke, Hinata, and Team Guy returned to the village and relayed what happened back in mid-October. It's now the first week of November. Naruto could only stare, his mouth working for a response, any response. It just wouldn't come. Jiraiya had warned them about the risks associated with the Hiraishin. Had he truly been transported into the future on accident? It hadn't been among the possibilities that the Sannin had listed, but he had also noted that it was unpredictable. It was messing with the space-time continuum. After all, and that meant that time would obviously be included in possible mishaps, or applications. He had managed to not only to miss his target by hundreds of kilometers, but he had also missed his target time by several weeks. A chill ran up his spine at that realization. He truly understood what Jiraiya had meant by the jutsu being dangerous, and Kurama had been right. He had gotten lucky. But you're alive, Tsunade continued, watching Naruto closely, and you seem unharmed, although I expect your chakra reserves are depleted, again. She smiled then, and her eyes twinkled a little in the faint lamplight. He idly wondered if that was a trait inherited by every Hokage. I know a few people who will be more than pleased to see you, and I suggest you get going to greet them. I will, Naruto said slowly, his head still spinning at the new revelation. But Tsunade was right. He was back now, and that's what really mattered. Thank you, Tsunade-sama. Is Hinata? Is she? Hinata's fine, she replied, smirking a little before stifling a yawn. It was wise of you to utilize the jutsu you did to save her, rather than risk both of your lives with the Hiraishin. She sustained a concussion and some minor internal damage, but she was able to leave the hospital after only a few days. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief at that, and Tsunade tilted her head to one side and peered curiously at Huang. By the way, when did you get a pet? Oh, sorry. This is Huang-san, the daughter of Fong-sama, who's the ancient fire or something. I landed on his volcano last night, and he wanted me to sign a contract since I've died once, I guess. So I guess I'm kind of friends with the phoenixes now, although I feel like there are only 2 of them. He glanced at Huang, who tilted her head at him before nodding once. Yep. 2. Huang-san is supposed to follow me around, or at least Fong-sama said so. She made it easier to see on my way back. Huang crooned and looked generally pleased with herself, at least as much as a bird could. Tsunade, though, looked stunned enough that one might think she had just won a game of dice. Her eyes were a little wide and glued to the phoenix, and her mouth was hanging slightly open. I see. She coughed after a time, once again having to compose herself. This boy never ceases to surprise me. Of all the contracts he could have found, for it to be phoenixes. Tsunade shook her head, the amused smile returning to her features. Well, we can discuss this more later. Right now, I think it's more important that you get home and let everyone know that you're okay. Report back here this evening so that I can get your full report of your part in the kidnapping, as well as what happened after you disappeared. Will do, Tsunade-sama. Thanks again. He called back, already halfway to the door. Oh, Aruka has since moved. She trailed off and rolled her eyes. Naruto was already gone. You'll figure it out, she sighed, going back to her work with another shake of her head. Still, she couldn't keep the smirk from tugging at the corners of her lips. He is something else. As much as he wanted to head straight home, Sasuke's apartment was close to the academy, and it was only right to stop by and explain what had happened. He landed at the building's entrance and tugged at the door, only to find it locked tight. He made a face and leapt upwards, jumping between balconies until he arrived at the right one. Without preamble, he rapped on the sliding glass door a few times, waiting until a light came on inside. A very sleepy-looking Haku appeared at the door, blinking blearily through the glass before his eyes snapped open wide. Naruto-kun, he cried, tearing open the door and flinging himself at the blonde. Naruto had work to keep his balance as the older boy hit him with a rib-cracking hug. Hey, Haku, Naruto sputtered, trying to pry him off and laughing a little while doing so. It's good to see you, too, but I guess it's a little different from your end. Haku stepped back and raised a curious eyebrow, though he was still beaming. I'm not sure what you mean, but, oh, Sasuke. Sasuke, Naruto-kun's back. Haku yelled through the door. Sasuke was at the door in under 2 seconds, although he still managed to make it look casual. His hair was a little disheveled, and he was just wearing a black t-shirt and shorts, but he looked wide awake. It's about time, you damned idiot, he growled, stalking the last few steps to his friend and landing a solid punch on Naruto's shoulder. The blonde grinned fiercely and returned the blow, then was surprised when Sasuke pulled him into a quick one-armed hug. If you keep doing reckless shit like that, I swear I'll kill you myself one day. It really has been 3 weeks, hasn't it? Naruto sighed, scratching behind one ear as his friend withdrew. Sasuke raised an eyebrow in a very similar manner to Haku, and so Naruto told them. He kept it brief, not wanting to wait to dawdle there too long. The explanation of what had gone wrong with the Hiraishin was simple enough to relay, but the meeting with Fong took a bit of embellishing. It took nearly 20 minutes to finish, and by the end of it both older boys were seated and shaking their heads. You're lucky to have landed so close, in both space and time, Sasuke muttered. That's what Kurama said. Naruto agreed, though he shrugged and glanced at Huang, who was now perched contentedly on the balcony's railing. But I guess it wasn't all bad, considering the contract. Who would have thought that dying would help me out one day? Despite everything that had happened, Sasuke found himself smirking, and Haku let out a little giggle. Naruto was back, after all, why shouldn't they be happy? Anyway, you guys can come with me when I report to Tsunade-sama tomorrow and hear all about it. Right now, though, I need to get home. Oh, Aruka-sensei and Hinata moved into a new apartment while you were gone, Sasuke said as they stood, nodding towards the south. It's the building right behind Ichiraku, funny enough. Top floor, Unit 11. Here, one sec. He disappeared into the apartment then, leaving Naruto confused in his wake. They had talked about moving a few weeks before, in the time period Naruto knew, anyway, but he hadn't expected it to happen so soon. Aruka probably had a good reason for it, though. Sasuke returned a moment later and flicked a small key at him. Hinata gave me a key for emergencies, and I think this counts as one. Just get it back to me whenever. Thanks, Sasuke. Naruto extended his fist, and Sasuke rapped his knuckles in response. I'll see you both tomorrow. Lunch is at Ichiraku, on me. He grinned at the pair before jumping onto the railing and diving off, heading towards his new home in the pale light of an approaching dawn. Naruto wasn't surprised to find Aruka gone when he slipped into the apartment. It was the middle of the week, and the instructor always woke extremely early to arrive at the academy with enough time to prepare his lessons. He scanned around briefly, finding a note addressed to Hinata on the counter. I know you'll be out all day again, so be safe and do your best for Naruto. I was thinking about inviting everyone out for barbecue tonight, so make sure you work up an appetite. Aruka. That got Naruto smiling a little. He was glad that things seemed to be okay, at least. He moved silently down the hall, Huang gliding by his side like a bright, weightless specter. The first door he opened to find an empty bedroom, although it very clearly wasn't his. The cream-colored bed sheets looked new, as did the plush violet comforter atop them. He closed the door after spying a bra and pair of panties lying atop the dresser, definitely not his room. The next door opened into a bathroom, complete with sinks and a bathing area, and had doors on either side that presumably led into the adjoining bedrooms. Naruto opened the last door on the right very slowly, and immediately recognized many of the things that had been in his old room. His heart skipped a beat when his eyes fell upon the bed, where a familiar green blanket was wrapped around a small, trembling form. He slipped inside without making a sound, tentatively approaching the bed with his breath caught in his throat. Naruto leaned down very slowly, easing the blanket back enough to glimpse Hinata's face. The sight made him ache to the core of his being. She seemed peaceful enough in sleep, but the sheets under her head were stained dark from the aftermath of far too many tears. Her nose was a little red, covered like her cheeks with salty streaks left over from hours of mourning. Her brow knitted slightly when the blanket was pulled back, but she only shivered and tried to tug it back up. It struck Naruto then just how hard it must have been for everybody. What had been less than a day for him had been a nightmarish 3 weeks for those that knew him, and Hinata most of all. He had been in such a hurry to get back that, even after being told about the time lapse, he hadn't considered the impact that his vanishing would have on those close to him. He tried to imagine how he might feel if Hinata had just disappeared. It was hard to even think about, and she had lived through it for weeks. He crawled onto the bed beside Hinata, careful not to disturb her. He didn't try to get under the blanket, instead just moving close and putting his arms around her. She murmured something unintelligible in her fitful slumber, reacting to his warmth and pressing in against his chest. Naruto smiled, settling down and placing a light kiss on her forehead. Hinata let out contented sigh, and her quivering gradually ceased. She wouldn't know the reason until she woke, but that night's sleep would be the best in recent memory. Huang watched the young couple for a few minutes, her head turning this way and that as if intrigued. She hovered a meter off the ground, her wings unfurled but not beating to keep her aloft. After a time the phoenix glided over to the unused pillow at the end of the bed, settling down with her beautiful plumage spread behind her. The fire didn't so much as singe the linens, and the pillow barely even compressed under her body weight. The morning sunlight spilled out across Konoha as they slept, bathing the village in warm splendor that fought away the night's chill. There were no enemies lurking nearby ready to steal away their peace, no dark forces ready to pounce the moment they allowed themselves to rest. Their world was quiet for now, and they could sleep without fear of another tragic tomorrow. They had earned that much, at least. Chapter 26. A Kindling Alliance. Naruto coughed as he stumbled around within the cloud of debris, rubbing at his eyes to clear away both the dust and sleepiness. Something ceramic crunched beneath his foot. A piece of shower tile, maybe. A bruise would doubtless form on his lower back from where it had broken the sink into 100 pieces, but that was one of his lesser concerns for the time being. A melodious avian cry rang through the apartment after a moment, followed by a gust of wind that cleared the haze away in an instant. He was left blinking rapidly through a vaguely Naruto-shaped hole in the wall. Huang hovered on the other side, her head tilted in a silent question. Thanks Huang-san, he breathed, adding after a second of listening to her, yeah, I'm fine, and no, I don't think she meant to do that. The phoenix cocked her head to the other side before gliding over to him, settling down to perch on his shoulder. Naruto. Hinata appeared where Huang had been, her eyes wide and filled with tears. But wariness and fear had found their way in as well, and she made no further move towards him. Instead she merely stared for several long seconds, taking in Naruto's disheveled appearance and that of his new companion. Is it really? Are you really here? It's me, Hinata, he said with a broad grin, spreading his arms. Cannot tell? She shook her head, not willing to be tricked. If it was an enemy looking to prey on her distress, it wasn't going to happen. What's your least favorite food? She asked suddenly. Naruto raised an eyebrow, then made a face at her. Uncooked vegetables. And most even if they are cooked. What's the name of your prisoner? Kurama, and he's my partner. How did we first meet? You, me, and Sasuke teamed up in that group sparring match back in our first year at the academy. What sometimes happens when we kiss? I accidentally bite your lip with my fangs. What do you always say to me before we go on a mission? Be safe. Hinata was struggling to maintain her composure now, and had already stepped most of the way through the gap in the wall. She reached out towards his face as she approached, but hesitated a few centimeters away. She bit her lower lip and closed her eyes before asking the last question. What did you tell me when you woke up in the H hospital after Tsunade attacked? There was no doubt in her mind that it was really Naruto when he grinned, but she waited for the answer regardless. That I love you, silly. Naruto. And it really was Naruto. Reached up and put a hand on her shoulder, looking her directly in the eyes and smiling that brilliant, goofy smile that he always did. It's me, Hinata, I promise. Words weren't at all sufficient to express the overflow of emotions that took hold of Hinata at that moment. She choked on a sob and flung herself forward with enough force to knock Naruto back into the remains of the sink and to the ground, wrapping her arms around his waist so tightly that it seemed she would never let go. Where have you been? Hinata cried, burying her face into his shirt. It's been 3 weeks, and we searched for you, but there were too many questions to voice, and she wanted to ask them all at once. Naruto wrapped his arms around her, not sure what else he could do. To him it had been only a day, but after talking to Tsunade, Sasuke, and Haku, he knew that it had actually been much longer than that. And what is that? She sniffed a few times before lifting her head to stare up at his shoulder, Huang's flickering plumage reflecting in her teary eyes. Well, it's kind of a crazy story. Naruto began. It took a little while to explain what had happened, from when he had leapt off of the cliff to save her until he had returned the night before. It had all flown past so quickly on his end that he was able to finish the explanation in half an hour, though that was longer than it had taken to tell Sasuke and Haku. Hinata needed all of the details, he felt. Her tears were dry by the time he finished, although she hadn't moved to get up. After 3 long weeks of searching and despairing, any distance between them was too much. Only a day. Hinata sighed, snuggled a little closer, and then took a deep, steadying breath. She smelled a lot of dust, ash, and a bit of sulfur, but underneath it all was Naruto. For the first time in weeks she felt relief and contentment, as if simply by being close again he had lifted some invisible weight from her mind. We have a lot to catch up on, but you're back. That's what matters right now. She slowly pushed herself back up, lifting her face towards his and unashamedly pressing into a fierce kiss, one that she'd been subconsciously saving for when he returned. After a moment of surprise he returned it, only to wince a few seconds in. Sorry, he murmured. Hinata only laughed softly before licking the blood from her lower lip. Don't be, she cooed, resting her head against his chest again. I missed that about you, too. They lay there together for a time, neither speaking nor moving, instead simply catching up on time lost. After a few minutes, Hinata blinked and lifted her head abruptly. Have you told Aruka-sensei or Kakashi-sensei that you're back yet? Naruto blinked, gave her a sheepish grin. Ah, not yet. I sort of wanted to get back to see you first. That caused a light blush to spring to her cheeks, but she still clicked her tongue and pushed herself up, taking Naruto's hand and dragging him with her. Well, come on. Her mood had transitioned rapidly from extreme apprehension, to relief, and finally to overjoyed. The young Hyuga was glowing. Shouldn't we clean up around here? He asked, glancing around at the wreckage. Hinata blinked, then appeared to take in their surroundings for the first time. Her blush grew gradually into a bright flush as her lips started to move wordlessly. It took a few seconds to get anything out, but she seemed pretty flustered when it finally did. We probably should, she said faintly. She turned back to her boyfriend with a piteous, exhortingly apologetic look in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Naruto. I didn't mean to push you like that, I promise. I was just so shocked and I panicked and just moved automatically and, oh, what is Aruka-sensei going to think? We only just moved in and now I've. Hinata. Naruto laughed, putting his hands on her shoulders and pulling her into a hug. It's okay. I know it was an accident, and Aruka-sensei isn't going to hold it against you. It was my fault for surprising you, anyway. Huang clucked her agreement from his shoulder. Hinata took another deep breath and nodded, trying to settle the myriad of thoughts and emotions flying around in her head. Okay. Thank you, Naruto. Hinata looked up and met his gaze, giving him an excited smile made all the more dazzling by her beautiful, shimmering eyes. And welcome home. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Stopping by the academy to see Aruka caused a lot more commotion than Naruto had expected. As he and Hinata passed people in the streets, most startled expressions rapidly turned sour. It seemed that there were many who weren't glad to see him back. There were a handful of individuals that smiled at the pair, though, enough that Naruto was genuinely surprised. According to Hinata, a good number of people had expressed concern to either her or one of their friends while he had been gone. The attitudes of some were changing, although it was a slow process. Aruka nearly broke down in front of his class when the couple arrived at his door unannounced. He managed to muster the grace to step out before pulling Naruto into a suffocating bear hug. They could both tell that the Chunin was doing his best not to cry, but Hinata especially could see the unshed tears threatening to overflow. She had seen him holding back for far too long. It took some convincing, but Naruto managed to assure Aruka that they would both be back for dinner. Welcome back, Naruto, a familiar voice called from a nearby. Hinata and Naruto stopped as they exited the academy, standing together in the shade of a lone tree that hosted a single swing. She laced her fingers between his and squeezed, and he grinned. Hey Kakashi-sensei, and Sasuke, Haku, Naruto asked, turning his gaze up towards the tree branches. Sure enough, their teacher sat lounging against the trunk on a high bough, only just lowering his book to look down at his students. He vanished and reappeared in front of them, with Haku and Sasuke landing on either side of him a second later. These two briefed me on what happened. It's a good thing you didn't get sent too far into the future, or else you might have missed the rescheduled Chunin exams. His smirk couldn't be hidden completely by the mask. Naruto grinned, although the expression dwindled quickly. Something had been bothering him all morning. Sensei, I don't really understand what happened. Jiraiya Sensei said that things like this could happen if the jutsu isn't done right, but. I don't feel like any time passed. He wrinkled his nose, still trying to wrap his head around the idea that he had traveled through time, if only for a brief period. My hair didn't grow any, and I fell on Fong-sama's volcano right after I teleported. How could 3 weeks have passed for everybody else if only a day did for me? And does that mean that? Naruto, Kakashi interjected, holding up a hand and shaking his head. I could answer your questions with only observational assumptions and guesses, but I don't have any real answers for you. Jiraiya would be able to give you better explanations than I could. For now, I would avoid using that technique until he says you're ready. Naruto blinked, but nodded. It felt a little strange that Kakashi hadn't told him not to use it, but rather suggested that he don't. Good. Let's head to the Hokage's office now. Tsunade-sama is expecting us. ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************* would hopefully be the second to last time he would need to. Aruka deserved a full story as well. Naruto and his team all stood together in front of Tsunade's desk, listening intently while he spoke about the mountain, his meeting with Fong, and the journey back to Konoha. Following his tale, Tsunade took a moment to fill him in on the fallout in regards to the Sound 5, and she also handed him a paper voucher. 150,000 ryo. Naruto balked, eyes widening when he saw the amount. What for? Kimimaro Kagaya was listed in the Hidden Mists bingo book, with a bounty of just over 1,000,000 ryo. Each of your teammates, and Haku, received the same amount, as did each member of Team Guy. Technically, the bounty should have been split between just the 6 of them, but they insisted it be given equally to all 7. She shrugged and leaned back in her chair, a little smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. You've got some loyal friends, Naruto. Yeah, they're pretty much the best, he confirmed, squeezing Hinata's hand and winking sideways at Sasuke and Haku. Well, since you're all here, Tsunade continued, rummaging through a few stacks of papers on her desk, I'm sure that Kakashi has informed you, but the Chunin exam is a little less than a month away now, and he has recommended that all 3 of you retake it. Naruto quirked an eyebrow and glanced up at his instructor. You recommended me? He asked curiously. Kakashi shrugged. I figured you'd want to take the exam if you got back in time for it. Was I wrong? No. But, you really believed I would be back? The Jonin smiled knowingly, the expression seen only in his visible eye, and his other students did as well. We all knew you'd come back, Naruto. The blonde beamed up at him, rubbing behind his head with one hand in a sheepish manner. He didn't really know what to say to that, but he felt warm appreciation for his friends blossoming inside of him. Warm fuzzies will need to wait for later, Tsunade cut in, although she was smirking as well. Naruto and Sasuke, you are both allowed to bypass the first exam based on your ranking in the previous one. The village leaders have unanimously agreed that all contestants that made it to the 3rd stage are eligible for this. The boys in question felt positively about it for all of an instant before they realized the omitted detail. Hinata was part of their team and hadn't made it to the 3rd stage. Hinata, she continued, glancing down at a piece of paper. You were among those that were selected from the preliminaries to be given the same option, based on your performance against Neji. But Tsunade-sama, Hinata began, clearly confused at the turn of events, I lost the match against my cousin. That's true, Tsunade conceded, but Chunin are not selected based on winning and losing. You came close to defeating an opponent that was stronger than you, through sheer determination and intellectual aptitude. As a matter of fact, if I recall correctly, you only lost because you refused to deal a fatal blow to your opponent. Is that correct? Hinata hesitated, but gave a reluctant nod after a moment. I can't say for certain, but I think that if I had risked killing Neji Nisan, I might have won the match, yes. As we suspected, the Hokage nodded. That was the main reason that we granted you an exception. Do not forget, Hinata, being a shinobi isn't about succeeding at all costs. It's about finding the best solution in any given circumstance, and I would argue that your decision in this instance was for the best, even if it did cost you entrance to the final exam. Hinata wasn't sure what to say at first. After some fidgeting and flushing, she bowed low and spoke graciously. Thank you, Tsunade-sama. That's all the business I have for you. Now, if you'll. Anyo, Tsunade-sama. Naruto started, causing the woman to blink herself into silence. What happened with Gara? Her expression darkened, and she sat back with her arms folded. Nothing, she said flatly. He hasn't said a word in the last 3 weeks, not to anybody. Attempts to get information out of him have been fruitless. For now he is still our prisoner, and his siblings are our guests. They are allowed to visit him once a day, but Gara hasn't spoken to them either. Naruto frowned, adding to his increasingly troubled look. Do you think I could go see him? He asked hopefully. He expected Tsunade to deny him flat out, but she surprised him. If you'd like, she responded evenly, rifling through some more papers until she found one she was looking for. She scribbled a quick signature on it and held it out. I had a feeling you'd want to, and had this prepared just in case. It'll get you into the lower levels of this tower and into the high security cell block, with an escort, of course. Thanks. Naruto took the paper and folded it into his pocket. Where are Temari and Kankuro staying? I think I want to talk to them first. They have a suite in the Maple Leaf Inn just down the street. I hear that they don't leave much, so you might be able to see them now. Thank you, Tsunade-sama, Kakashi intoned, bowing with his students. She nodded and dismissed them, swiveling in her chair to look out the window after they had departed. Shizune, she sighed. Her summoned attendant phased into the room through one of the bookcases, carrying her pet pig Tauntaun. Did you get all of that? Yes, Tsunade-sama. What do you make of it? It certainly seems like Naruto, especially if Hinata is convinced. She and Aruka know him best, after all. But, just to make sure, have an Anbu agent watch him until I can speak to Aruka. There's no reason to throw caution to the wind, especially with all that's happened to them recently. Yes, Tsunade-sama. Shizune turned to leave, but Tsunade caught her with a last query, one with a pointedly sly tone to it. Oh, and speaking of Aruka, I don't think now is the appropriate time for that. Shizune replied, clearly flustered by her superior's suggestion. Naruto's only just gotten back, and there's no need to rush things. Tsunade chuckled and waved her hand. Maybe later. Then. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Oh, you're alive, Kankuro muttered through the cracked door. He opened it fully and stepped aside for Team 7 to enter, though he didn't seem too happy to see them. Temari, he called. That kid's here finally. Naruto-kun, right. Temari stepped out from a door just down the hall, and Naruto and Sasuke both felt heat rise in their cheeks. The older girl stood at the center of the hallway, one hand holding up her damp hair while the other retrieved hairpins held between her lips to fix into the blonde locks. She wore absolutely nothing outside of a plain white towel, fastened tightly just above her bosom and barely reaching down to her upper thigh. Her tanned skin glistened with droplets of water, still clinging from a presumed bath. Yeah, Naruto mumbled dopily. Hinata was flushed a bright red as well, but it wasn't nearly for the same reasons that the boys were. She kept flicking her eyes back and forth between Naruto and the other girl, as if unable to decide what to do while feeling the need to do something. The poor Hyuga had no idea why her chest had suddenly gone hot, and she didn't particularly like the feelings she was experiencing. We came to talk to you about Gara, Sasuke put in finally, managing to take his eyes off of the luscious 16-year-old to spare a glance at his friend. He knew immediately what was going through Hinata's mind. He dug an elbow into Naruto's ribs with little in the way of remorse, snapping the blonde out of his daze. And yeah, this oaf is back. Put some clothes on, and we can talk. Temari quirked an eyebrow at the Uchiha, but only pretended to simper before turning to saunter back into the bathroom, swaying her hips a bit more than was likely necessary. Conceited bitch, Kankuro muttered as the trio came in, almost sounding as if he was apologizing. Going on a month cooped up in here with her, and it gets worse every day. Aren't you two siblings? Hinata asked, still trying to shake the odd emotions away. Naruto gave her a sidelong look, undoubtedly a result of her stutter. She scolded herself inwardly, visibly calming after a few seconds. A few weeks of her boyfriend missing was no excuse to have emotional swings. Yeah. And he sighed and slumped down to sit on one of the two beds occupying their standard hotel room. By the way, weren't you dead? He asked bluntly, turning a quizzical eye on Naruto. It's a long story, he responded shortly, taking a seat opposite the older boy. You can drop the friendly act, Sasuke commented dryly. We haven't forgotten that you and your village tried to kill us, or that you succeeded in murdering a good number of people. Kankuro grimaced, but before he could reply Tamari stepped out from the washroom again, this time fully clothed. All of that was done on the Kasage's orders. Or rather, on what we thought were the Kasage's orders. You should know the story by now. She sat down beside her brother and crossed her legs, folding her hands in her lap before winking at Naruto. Well, perhaps not you, cutie. Naruto blinked and raised an eyebrow, more curious about what she was talking about than her lattermost statement. Hinata felt that odd heat building in the pit of her stomach again, but she ignored it. Orochimaru took advantage of Tsunade's poor economic status and manipulated us into invading Konoha. Before we arrived here, he killed our father, the Yondaime Kazakage, and took his place. Most of us didn't want to take part in the plan in the first place. You seemed pretty willing during the exam, Naruto countered, stuck between feeling sorry for them and being angry with her nonchalance. Her dad had been killed, and she didn't even seem fazed. Never let your enemies read your thoughts, Tamari shrugged. I wasn't about to hesitate with the rest of our forces putting their lives on the line. I wanted to leave, but Gara. Kankuro finished for her. She nodded, and let him continue. It was our father's plan to use him as the centerpiece of the assault. He was an alright kid growing up. He didn't have any friends, really, but he had us. But one day our uncle Yashimaru, under orders from the Kasage, tried to kill him. We're not really sure the details, but he changed that day. He carved the symbol for love into his forehead with the sand, and ever since he's been darker, more withdrawn, and scarier by the minute, Tamari breathed in closing. She shook her head and folded her arms. Shukaku's influence has been growing, and we all know it. We think it was our father's plan all along, to turn our younger brother into a sociopathic killing machine. Naruto opened his mouth to speak, but Hinata beat him to it. She had seen the confused look on his face. Why would his own father want him to be isolated and devoid of a moral conscience? Naruto flashed an appreciative smile at her for the explanation of the word, but already his hands were balling into fists. He would have done it to one of us if he could have, Tamari nearly spat. We weren't compatible with the Ikibi, and so he had it sealed into Gara while he was still in the womb. He didn't want a child. All he wanted was a weapon. They understood now why the two siblings spoke so dismissively about the Kasage. Naruto felt over a decade of resentment boiling up inside of him, but he wouldn't let it out here. Hinata put her hand over his, and Sasuke nudged his arm on the other side. Those two simple actions washed away the anger, and he found himself smiling faintly. Huang, still perched on his shoulder, let out a soft crooning sound, as if she was also trying to contribute. Yes, you could consider yourself lucky, Kurama put in. There aren't many humans like your guardian in the world, nor others like your friends that accept you despite my presence. Even so, I doubt any of that would have made a difference for Gara. What do you mean? Why not? Shukaku is arrogant, and he delights in killing. Even before becoming captured by the hidden sand, he sought out and slaughtered humans for sport. I described him as mad before, and although it is a fitting description, it is not wholly accurate. He is cunning, and though the weakest of the 9 Biju, he is still strong. I get all of that, Naruto responded impatiently, ignoring the odd looks he was getting from the two opposite him. Hinata and Sasuke frequently told him that he always got a vacant expression on his face when speaking to Kurama. But why wouldn't real friends have helped Gara? Because of Shukaku's personality, the fox sighed, as if it were obvious. And I suspect partially due to his seal. Minato designed your seal as a means to cut me off from you, but to also allow you limited access to my chakra. Whoever sealed Shukaku was either not as skilled as your father, or purposefully allowed the Tanuki access to Gara's mind. You've met the Ikibi. Imagine having that in your head all the time growing up. Naruto thought about it, and shivered. The QB thinks it's probably Gara's seal that's the problem. It might have been designed to let Shukaku influence him. Sasuke and Hinata nodded thoughtfully, but Temari and Kankuro only stared at him for a few seconds before blurting out a scandalized question. You talked to that thing? They demanded in unison. Naruto shrugged. Yeah, we get along okay. We worked things out about 4 months ago. He stopped, thought about it for a second, and then amended his statement. Actually 5 months ago now. Did I mention that you're also lucky that I'm so reasonable? Shut up. Well, Kankuro started, eyeing Naruto with a bit of uncertainty. We've talked about it a few times now, but even if that is the case, it doesn't help us. Gara's locked up, doesn't want to see anybody, and I doubt there's anyone skilled enough with Fuinjutsu to fix his seal. Sure there is. I bet Jiraiya-sensei would do it. Again the siblings blinked at him, their eyes going a bit wide. Jiraiya. As in one of the legendary Sannin. He is your sensei. Temari shook her head and slumped back. No wonder you kids are so strong. We're strong because we trained ourselves to be strong, Sasuke said tersely. We've had great teachers, but in the end it's up to the student to excel. And we've always had each other, Hinata offered, receiving nods from her teammates. I know I wouldn't be where I am today without Sasuke and Naruto. In more ways than one, she thought absently. Why don't we go see Gara now? Naruto stood up and glanced to his shoulder. Huang-san, can you go find Jiraiya-sensei for me? I'd start looking near the hot springs and bathhouses. If he's not there, try any place that serves alcohol. Huang dipped her head by way of acknowledgement before promptly vanishing in a flash of flame. Jinchuriki to a friendly Biju, studies under a Sannin, has a freaking phoenix pet. Kankuro shook his head, unable to stop himself from smirking. Really? Temari, who is this kid? I told you not to forget my name, Naruto replied, though he was grinning back at the older boy. Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Pesky bird. Jiraiya muttered, rubbing at a tender, hand-shaped area on his cheek. Could have waited until I was finished writing. Huang hissed at the old man from Naruto's shoulder, but made no further comment. I asked her to get you, sensei, the blonde remarked, standing from the bench just outside of the hotel. Sorry she interrupted your stuff, but this is important. Good to see you too, kid. Now what do you want? Naruto explained the situation as succinctly as he could, with Sasuke and Hinata pitching in here and there. By the end of it, Jiraiya had his arms folded and brow furrowed. He glanced around for a few seconds before offering a reply. Where are the emissaries? Temari and Kankuro. They went on ahead to let Gara know we're coming. That we're coming, huh? Jiraiya clicked his tongue and rubbed at his stubbled chin, thinking. Well, I can do it, probably, but I'd need to get the kids' permission, as well as Tsunade's. There's also the possibility that Shukaku could force his way out as a defensive mechanism if we're not careful, and even if we are, it's still a risk. He tilted his head to one side, studying the three genin for a few moments. What makes you want to fix him so bad? It's not fixing him, Naruto said before the other two could even think to respond. It's helping. He's just like me, only he had to go through more crap than I did growing up. He isn't just like you, Jiraiya snapped, his tone frosty enough to take them aback. Naruto, I know you feel like you share an odd kinship with Gara, but your similarities end with the circumstances of your births. He may be a Jinchuriki as well, but that doesn't mean that sealing the Ikibi away is going to make him a different person. If he is beyond recovery, he'll likely be executed, and the Biju will be sealed inside of a different host. All three of you will need to come to terms with that. And if he isn't? Hinata asked after several seconds of tense silence. What happens if he's okay? That decision will rest with Tsunade, although I don't foresee her executing Suna's impotent Jinchuriki. He'll probably be used as a substantial bargaining chip in negotiations for a peace treaty, if I had to guess. The boy will be far from impotent even with the most advanced sealing technique, Kurama growled. He sounded more annoyed than usual. We Biju value our continued existence as fiercely as any other. Shukaku would not allow his container to be left defenseless, one way or another. He would find a way. You're creepy sometimes. Aloud, Naruto directed his attention back to Jiraiya. Alright, I understand. Will you do it, then? I need to discuss it with Tsunade first, but I'll do what I can. It was a noncommittal answer, but it was all the sage was willing to give for the time being. Before we go, however, I need to make something clear to you three. Naruto, Sasuke, and Hinata stopped mid-stride, blinking up at him curiously. Jiraiya extended a hand towards Naruto's forehead and struck his Hitai with a sharp flick. The minor blow caused the youth to stagger back and fall onto the bench, although he was back on his feet in an instant. What was that for? Naruto demanded, rubbing at his brow just below the headband. Before he was allowed to get genuinely angry, Jiraiya pulled him into a quick one-armed hug. For almost dying, you stupid kid. I'm your godfather, remember? He released Naruto and shook his head. I realize that you thought it was necessary to use the Hiraishin, and maybe it was. From what I heard, you wouldn't have had much time to think of an alternative. Regardless, the sage narrowed his eyes and allowed his chakra to surge for only a second, the force of it enough to push the trio backwards and down onto their seats again. I want all three of you to give me your word that you will not use the Hiraishin until I say you can. But, Sasuke began, but Jiraiya cut in before he could get another word out. No. There will be no excuses, and there will be no exceptions. I've told you how dangerous that jutsu is. Naruto could easily have ended up dead in innumerable ways. He could have ended up in the deepest part of the ocean, instantly crushed by the pressure. He could have ended up on the moon, only to have to wait for the lack of oxygen to kill him while he slowly lost consciousness. He could have ended up inside of that volcano instead of on top of it. There are many more ways that one can die using the Hiraishin than to live. He let the sharp words sink in for a few seconds before turning his tone more docile again. So until I say that you may try it, which will be under my strict supervision only, none of you will attempt the technique again. Understood? Not to be not to be impudent, Jiraiya-sensei, but how would you know if we used it or not? Hinata asked tentatively. Yeah, and what could you really do if we decided to keep using it? Naruto put in. Jiraiya hit him with a stare that could have turned milk sour. The blonde paled, and added quickly, not that we would, of course. You each have a simple tracing jutsu on you, and I'll be able to tell if you move from one place to another, or outside of the area that I can sense, faster than you ought to. 3 pairs of eyes widened, then immediately began scanning every bit of exposed skin looking for jutsu shiki. When did you? Naruto ventured, wondering if the old man was just lying to them. Sasuke sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose in agitation, and Hinata only looked dismayed. When he knocked us back with his chakra, the Uchiha grumbled, folding his arms. That's right, and if I find out that any of you have used the Hiraishin without my permission, I'll apply a seal that won't allow you to use it or any other space-time ninjutsu. Ever. Their expressions ranged from distressed to indignant, but nobody put up any further arguments. They had a feeling that the sage wasn't messing around. We hadn't planned to use it anyway, Naruto mumbled, finally standing with his friends. Can we go now? Jiraiya only nodded once before turning towards the Hokage's tower, and the young trio followed a few steps behind. What a jerk. Seriously, Sasuke muttered. Could have just told us not to use it. He's worried about us, Hinata whispered. I think it's just his way of making sure we're safe. Her friends shrugged, although they both nodded begrudgingly after a moment. Hinata was seldom wrong when it came to interpreting others' intentions. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I want to be able to use my dad's jutsu as soon as I can. Naruto's eyes traveled up over the rooftops until they settled upon the 4th great rock face, upon the visage of Namikaze Minato. I'll make you proud, Dad. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The torch-lit halls below the tower were familiar to Team 7, it hadn't been all that long since they had defended Haku there. Their escort led them off of the main corridor and down more stairs, leading to a level with cold stone walls and foreboding shadows. Heavy metal doors lined the long hallway, all completely solid with no way to see inside. Sounds from within the cells were muffled, but angry, faraway shouts could be heard as they passed by. Temari and Konkuro were waiting at the end of the hall, in front of the cell that occupied the back wall. Its door was larger than the others. It bore multiple sigils, intricate ceiling tags that dangled from several horizontally hanging threads, and lines of jutsu shiki were scrawled across its surface. "Where's the old man?" Konkuro asked after the escort had retreated back down the hall to stand vigil by the entrance. "He had to talk to the Hokage first," Naruto answered easily, approaching the door. "Can we go in?" Temari grimaced, then motioned to the guard. She and her brother seemed to tense up, as if preparing for something. Naruto and company only had time to wonder why they were acting strange before a flash of light blinded them. Each of them became suddenly nauseous and dizzy, and for a moment could hear nothing but the rush of wind. As quickly as it had started, each sensation vanished, allowing them to blink open their eyes and look around wildly. "What the hell was that?" Sasuke asked, his Sharingan subconsciously activated and scanning around. "Security measures," Konkuro groaned, wringing his little finger inside of his ear in annoyance. "They do that every time they're about to open the door." Sure enough, the sigils and jutsu shiki had faded, the tags had been cleared of their script, and the door was ajar. "Always that same guy, too. I never even see him move, but he apparently does some kind of fancy ninjutsu to make sure we can't see or hear what he's doing to unseal it." He quieted immediately upon hearing the sound of rattling chains from within the room. "Let's go." Temari stepped past her brother and cautiously pushed the entryway inward, revealing the large cell within. An odd sense of deja vu took hold of Naruto, Sasuke, and Hinata as they stepped over the threshold of the prison. They couldn't tell how expansive the area was given the lack of illumination, but it was at least 20 meters to where the only light hung from a ceiling lost in the darkness above. Naruto shivered, but not from the cold. It was the kind of feeling that he had gotten when stepping into the arena during the Chunin exam's final matches, or when he had been standing before Fong on the top of the Phoenix's volcano. "This place is enormous," Hinata breathed. Everybody looked at her then, but she didn't get self-conscious from the attention like she might have otherwise. Her Byakugan was active, and she only stared around in wonder. "I think we're underneath the mountain. Every wall and bit of floor space is covered in sealing techniques, and they all seem to combine and flow together to one central point." Her eyes moved to the presumed center of the room, and it all made sense. "Gara." Naruto nodded. Shukaku's Jinchuriki sat calmly in the middle of the small circle of light, his eyes closed and breathing even. A heavy metal collar circled his neck, attached to which were 6 iron chains that led off into the dimness, presumably fastened to the far-off stone walls. Just enough slack had been left so he could move ever so slightly, but not nearly enough to let him lie down. His arms and wrists were bound behind his back by thick lengths of rope that circled his torso, into which were burned more lines of seals. Outside of his predicament, the boy was unharmed, and his plain white clothes looked to have been recently changed. At the very least, Tsunade had been making sure he was as comfortable as he could be given the circumstances. "Yo, Gara." Without any concern for caution or etiquette, Naruto walked through the darkness and into the small lit area occupied by the captive shinobi. He lowered himself down just in front of the other boy, crossing his legs and waiting a few seconds before continuing with, "How've you been?" "A foolish question, Uzumaki Naruto." Temari and Konkuro both gasped upon hearing their younger brother speak for the first time in weeks. They said nothing, either due to the shock or simply not wanting to interrupt. Gara opened his eyes slowly, and all parties present were relieved to see his irises back to their normal pale green. Shukaku seemed to be fully suppressed, for now. "I guess so," Naruto sighed, his eyes traveling along the lengths of chain. "Still, it could be worse. At least you're alive, right? I was told that you were likely dead." Gara tilted his head, the action causing the links to tighten on the other side. "It is good that you are not." Naruto blinked at that before grinning. "Yeah, I tried that once. I wasn't really interested in trying it again." To their collective bafflement, the corner of Gara's mouth turned up in the barest representation of a smirk. I have been considering what you told me, he started, speaking very deliberately. I was wrong in saying that you do not understand me. I have had time to think, and sleep. Gara looked around the room slowly, and there was no bitterness in his gaze as it fell over the many seals and safety precautions binding him. In fact, there was a definite note of appreciation somewhere in his expression. These seals are well crafted. They keep the Ikibi from invading my mind, most notably while I slumber. That's good to hear. Honestly, I'd probably go a bit nuts if I had some annoying voice in my head all the time. Naruto smiled mischievously, and Gara blinked at him once before that shadow of a smirk returned. Very funny, idiot. You know you love me, Naruto teased. Uzumaki Naruto, Gara continued, settling his eyes on the blonde. I wish to apologize for my actions up until this point, and those of my village. We were deceived. All of us, in one way or another, and while what has been done is inexcusable, I can offer nothing but my gratitude towards you and your village for the way in which I have been treated, even as a prisoner of war. Konoha is an interesting village. Gara, Tamari began, taking a step towards her brother as tears gathered in her eyes. Yourself again. He turned his head up towards her and nodded very slightly. With some help from these three, and with my mind as my own again, for the time being. Thank you both for coming to see me every day. I would have liked to speak to you sooner, but I needed to speak to the Jinchuriki first. Don't worry about it, Konkuro said gruffly. We're just glad you're alright. You can call me Naruto, the blonde remarked. And in case you forgot their names already, this is Sasuke and Hinata. Gara nodded to each of them in turn, and then met Naruto's eyes again. Why are you here, Naruto? To see if we can keep you from getting executed, Naruto responded bluntly. Gara seemed unfazed by the admission, but Tamari and Konkuro were taken aback. You didn't tell us he was going to be killed. Tamari accused. Naruto shrugged, but Sasuke thought it appropriate to at least qualify the statement. We didn't know until Jiraiya told us, but do you really think that it hasn't been considered? The sand kunoichi bristled and looked as if she was about to retort, but a simple flick of Gara's eyes stopped her in her tracks. Even if more docile and level-headed, the boy could still chill a person's blood with a glance. The leaf has every right to take my life, but I am not yet ready to die. What must I do to facilitate my survival? You talk a lot like Shino, Naruto said with a shake of his head. You two would probably get along pretty well. Gara managed to don a subdued quizzical expression, quite a feat for somebody without eyebrows. But anyway, we talked to Jiraiya-sensei, and he says he might be able to help. It took a few minutes of explanation, aided largely by Hinata, for Naruto to lay out the tentative plan, and by the end of it Gara's eyes were closed and he seemed to be deep in thought. They waited for a time, until finally he nodded and regarded them once again. I would welcome a stronger, modified seal for the Ikibi. I feel that if I could stay like this. He looked around at the multitude of seals confining him, seeing them as a respite within his tumultuous life rather than something to curse for imprisoning him. Then I might be able to come to understand you, Uzumaki Naruto. You, and your friends. I guess that settles it, then. Jiraiya's voice echoed through the stone chamber as he approached on silent feet, and all heads turned to watch as he entered the pool of light. He appeared more serious than usual, and he carried a few small scrolls in one hand and a satchel in the other. Tamari and Konkuro bowed respectfully when he came into view, and even Gara managed a courteous nod. I see that the heirs of Tsunade have not forgotten their manners. Are you prepared, boy? I am, Gara intoned without hesitating. Good, the sage grunted. Tsunade has decided to release you once the seal is in place, pending an agreement with your village. Obviously restitutions and a forced alliance will be in order, but the visiting diplomats seemed very willing to negotiate if your freedom was on the table. Sounds like your village wants you back, Naruto commented with a grin. Gara managed a shrug. They want their weapon back. For now, maybe. I'm working on changing how my village sees me, and I expect you to do the same. Gara considered that for a moment before offering a final nod, as well as that same small smirk that managed to make him look a little more human. Alright kids, visiting hours are over. This is going to take a while, and he's almost certainly going to be unconscious afterward. You can come back tomorrow when he's no longer at risk of becoming a rampaging Biju conduit. Jiraiya stood by and watched as the quintet turned to leave, a few final glances being spared for Gara on the way out. See you on the other side, Gara, Naruto intoned, waving just before departing from the light. The other boy again quirked his non-existent eyebrow, and before he could respond Jiraiya had stepped between them to begin his work. That's what Kurama said to you when you died, isn't it? Hinata whispered on the way out. Naruto winked at her, the action barely visible in the darkness. She smiled and gave his hand a tight squeeze. You really have grown, Naruto, in more ways than one. Hinata hadn't noticed until that moment, but Naruto was now noticeably taller than her, and she liked that just fine. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Nobody was in the correct mindset to train after the morning's events. Naruto, Sasuke, and Hinata spent the rest of the day roaming Konoha, with no purpose in mind outside of sharing in one another's company. Sasuke suggested testing out Naruto's Phoenix Summon, but the blonde declined largely due to not wanting to bother Fong, an immortal being, with something like testing his abilities. In the end, they sat together at Ichiraku, eating ramen and catching Naruto up on the past few weeks of activity and rebuilding efforts around Konoha. It's good to have my best customer back, Tsuki beamed as they stood to leave. Naruto grinned back at him and offered a thumbs up. It's good to be back, Tsuki-san. Even though I think I had a bowl of your ramen yesterday. My yesterday. Anyway. They shared a laugh and a wave before departing, strolling down Konoha's main road to burn the remaining time before dinner with Iruka. Naruto. Hinata started after a time, taking her boyfriend in with a glance. You haven't had a chance to change out of your clothes yet. She plucked a stray piece of charred something from near his waistband, and he made a face upon realizing for the first time that he was, in fact, filthy. Yeah, I know. It's been kind of a crazy day for us. We should get some new clothes, Sasuke offered, shrugging when they both blinked over at him as if surprised. What? All you ever wear is plain black shorts and shirts, and those weird rubber things when we're training or on missions, Naruto pointed out. Did you plan to get more? To be fair, I don't think any of our wardrobes are terribly diverse. It's not very practical for a shinobi to have to think about what he or she is going to have to wear every day during the course of duty. It's easier to just pick an outfit and stick with it, day in and day out. Hinata had a point, but that all seemed pretty boring to Naruto, and he said as much. That kinda makes sense, but I want a change of style, and some different stuff to wear around the apartment or when we have days off. I mean, at least you have those flowy dress things, and those shorts that you asked me about the other day. They really aren't too tight, by the way, I prom. Hinata's hand flew to Naruto's mouth before he could get another embarrassing word out. She was already red enough without him going into any more stories about her, at home, clothes. Well, as much as I'd love to hear about Hinata wearing tight clothes for you. Sasuke began, earning a scandalized look from Hinata. Let's just grab some casual stuff. Haku says I need to discover the rainbow of possibilities or something, in terms of clothing. Naruto let out a snort, and even the chagrined Hinata managed a giggle. Sasuke rolled his eyes and took a turn towards a nearby shop, not interested in their teasing today. The sun was well into its descent by the time they emerged from their last stop, where Naruto had managed to procure something to change into. The blonde sported a long-sleeved, loose-fitting burgundy shirt and black pants, which were held tight to his shins with plain bandages just above his jikatabi. He had been going for something like what his father used to wear, only mixed with colors his mother had favored. Hinata had seemed to like it, and Kurama had even hinted that Minato would have appreciated the outfit. Sasuke's definition of rainbow of possibilities likely fell out of line with Haku's. The Uchiha had retained his high-collared shirt style, and though his new one was open in the front, it was still black. His undershirt was midnight blue, and fit well to his torso. Dark pants covered his legs, although it was difficult to tell if they were merely gray, or some very faded shade of cobalt. Hinata hadn't changed anything about her own outfit, as she liked what she had picked for herself during the Chunin exams. A great deal of thought had gone into choosing her attire, but that didn't mean she couldn't pick up a few things for casual wear. She hadn't let either of the boys see what she had bought, mostly to avoid another round of teasing from Sasuke. Unfortunately for her, teasing came as a second nature to the Uchiha. You must have picked up some really questionable garments if you want to hide them that badly, he yawned. Or was it just because I was there? Shut up, Sasuke, she muttered without any real conviction. In truth, she had picked one or two things that would probably get returned on account of their revealing natures, but they didn't need to know that. They were for her, and she would definitely be returning them. Almost certainly. I'm just kidding, he sighed, rolling his eyes and giving her a playful shove. You and Naruto can go play dress up now. I'll see you guys tomorrow for training. I'm sure Kakashi has some ideas for a new regimen now that you're back, not to mention that the next exams are soon. I think I'm more than ready to get back to training, Hinata said, glad for the change of topic. Naruto only nodded, bidding Sasuke farewell as they parted ways for their respective homes. After Sasuke had gone, she gave Naruto another once-over before nodding thoughtfully. I think that'll go well with your coat. I have it in my room, whenever you want it back. Thanks. He seemed distracted by something, but Hinata knew that she wouldn't have to wait long to find out. Naruto usually confided in her without much prompting on her end. Hinata, I'm kind of scared, I guess. She blinked at him as they continued to walk, surprised to hear that from the boy she had known to be perpetually fearless and confident. Of a lot of things. A lot's been happening to us lately, a lot of dangerous things. Akatsuki is probably looking for me, and Itachi is with them. Orochimaru wants Sasuke, but we don't even know what for yet. That cursed seal isn't just gonna go away. He even sent those guys after us a few weeks ago. We keep surviving these things, but only just. I'm scared that the next time, or the time after that, we won't be so lucky. On top of all that, I'm worried about using Kurama's chakra, I guess. I've already shortened my lifespan, though by how long I won't ever really know. He did say that Uzumakis have longer lives than most people, though. But he tried to focus his thoughts. He was really just rambling now, but it felt good to be able to talk about his concerns. Even if we are working together, the fox's chakra always feels like it's threatening to take control. It's so angry, like it has a mind of its own. It does, in a way, Kurama grunted. Though I've already explained that at length. Even if I'm not seeking to take over your body, if you bite off more of my power than you can chew, it can alter your entire chakra circulatory system and brain chemistry. Right, I know. Even if we are on decent terms, at least, I think you're still the QB. And you would be wise not to forget it. Naruto, Hinata began, reaching down to take his hand. I'm afraid, too. She surprised herself by letting out a light laugh. I've already lost you twice, and although I'm starting to think you can come back from anything, I still get scared knowing what's out there. But, she chewed on her lower lip for a few seconds, until Naruto gave her hand a squeeze and spurred her into speech again. But if we don't train ourselves, if we don't defend the village and friends that we love, then we won't be ready when we have to face those dangers in the future. None of us are ready to take on Akatsuki. Even one of them might be able to take all three of us together, and I'm sure Orochimaru could as well. That's my drive to get stronger, though, because I want to be able to protect my friends when the time comes. I want to be able to protect you, because I don't think I could handle losing you again. Hey, Naruto said softly, reaching over to place his other hand atop their joined pair. It's going to take more power than every rogue ninja has combined to take me away again. I promise. Hinata smiled despite herself. It would be naive of her to believe too much in such an impossible guarantee, but a small part of her allowed that hope to blossom nonetheless. I believe in you, Naruto. I know that it's a struggle, but if anybody can handle Kurama's chakra, it's you. No matter how strong its influence, I know that you're stronger. You won't let it beat you, I know it. Thanks, he said again, this time with real sincerity as he turned mid-stride to catch her in a hug. You're the best, Hinata. She flushed at the sudden gesture, but returned the embrace nonetheless. She had missed how warm he felt, and the way that his arms seemed to fit perfectly around her every time they came together. They strolled the rest of the way home in a comfortable quiet, hands clasped firmly together. Many dangers lurked in the world beyond their village's walls, and some perhaps even within them. But they had one thing that their enemies didn't: each other. Chapter 27. To Keep a Promise. Training Ground 3 was silent save for the gentle rustling of turning leaves, a sound brought on by the frigid easterly breeze that foretold the coming of winter. A light rain had been falling since before dawn, and it added its own bone-deep chill to the three genin lying in wait around the clearing. Each set of hidden eyes was focused on Kakashi, who stood atop the centermost post looking for all the world like he was enjoying a sunny afternoon. The fact that he had both eyes revealed and open gave him away, however. "Here they come," he murmured. Half-lidded eyes flicked to one side to study the treetops, and an instant later a barrage of watery bullets came streaking silently through the rain. "Good use of the environment to cover your attack," he continued to himself, all in a voice too quiet to carry beyond his own ears. Next. He twisted even as he spoke, leaping into the air and adjusting his body so that the near-invisible projectiles passed harmlessly by, some coming close enough that he could feel the pressure. The Jonin's hands were already flying through seals before he was clear of the first attack, and a burst of fire from his own mouth met one from the opposite direction. The two fireballs met and exploded in a cloud of heat and steam, his own precisely calculated in strength to cancel out Sasuke's. Kakashi's eyes narrowed as he fell towards his landing, and when he hit the hard-packed earth his hands slammed into the ground as well. Doden. Rising hillock. A resounding crack rent the air as a large fissure split in front of him. What looked like Hinata was ejected from the new cleft, but the form vanished in a cloud of smoke when a small hill began to bubble into being between the two ridges. "You all should know better than that by now. You got the bells from me because I hadn't anticipated your teamwork and individual skill, but don't think I'll underestimate you three now." He lowered into a standard fighting stance then, eyes hard. They could beat him if they pushed themselves, he was sure of it. "Don't think for a minute that you've fooled me. This isn't all you've got. Come." As if in answer, three distinct chakra signatures flared, and they were upon him. The first was Hinata, appearing like a ghost out of the light haze. When had the fog risen? Kakashi smirked as he pivoted to engage the Hyuga's flashing blue palms, but he knew that the next would arrive before he could return a single strike. He turned away Hinata's blows with one hand, his other flitting to the opposite side to clash with Sasuke as the boy phased out of the ground beside him. "There's no way," Kakashi thought with a touch of humor. He was good, but he didn't think that anyone short of Guy could have defended against these two with only one arm each. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He made two copies, immediately using a replacement jutsu to change places with one in favor of engaging his last student himself. "Alright, Naruto. Let's see what you can." Even his thoughts were caught off guard when a pair of glowing orange claws burst from beneath his feet and shot for his ankles. Only reflexes honed from decades of training saved him from being pulled under, and only just. A fist of shuriken tore towards him the moment his feet left the ground, forcing him to use a kunai to deflect what he had not been prepared to avoid. Even with the Sharingan, he had trouble tracking the reddish blur through the rain. Naruto hit him with such force and at such a high speed that a shockwave burst around them, creating a small field within which rain could not fall for a moment. The blonde was wrapped in Kurama's cloak, all three tails writhing behind him as if eager for the fight. Kakashi had caught the punch with both hands in a grunt of effort, but was turning it away in almost the same instant. The move took Naruto's balance and used his momentum against him, forcing him to stumble past to one side. Kakashi whirled to follow, but instead dropped into a couch to allow one of the tails to pass harmlessly over his head. Had he remained standing, it would have struck him as hard as any fist could have. He's getting better at controlling it. Raiden. Discharge, Sasuke growled, leaping back from the clone he was fighting and raising a fist. Kakashi raised an eyebrow, as did each of his clones. A lightning technique wouldn't do any good, and Sasuke should have known that. Sending a current into the air would have no effect in the rain. Water was an excellent conductor, but the charge could only jump between droplets at random, if at all. He couldn't send it into the earth either, for the energy would become grounded despite the water underfoot. Kakashi was still wondering what the boy was up to in that split second when he realized why Hinata had seemed distracted in her fight. She had been concentrating. Sweeten. Condense, she whispered, raising one chakra-filled hand to the air. The pieces fell into place almost before Kakashi could react. Almost. The instant Sasuke's charged finger touched a mote of falling water, the droplet expanded. Rather, it joined with the one closest to it, and that one to its neighbor, and on so fast that it moved with the electricity surging through it. Hinata's technique was guiding the water as it fell to link into a chain that led from Sasuke's hand to where Kakashi still crouched from Naruto's attack. They weren't even bothering with the clones. Light filled the clearing as the joint technique went off, blazing a trail of lightning to a Jonin-sized ball of electricity. The two Bunshin dissipated with accompanying puffs of smoke, and for a second all three genin believed that they had won. Replacement technique, Sasuke muttered, kicking the charred log. I didn't think he got it off. I was watching him, too. He must have used it when the light was too bright for us to see, Hinata offered, frowning slightly as she said it. 1/10 of a second at most. 100th. Sasuke scowled as if the words were bitter in his own mouth. How the hell can he move that fast? Training. Naruto sighed, scanning the trees as he did. Still, kinda crazy, isn't it? They all shared a grin of one magnitude or another before scattering into the forest. A few seconds later Kakashi landed on the center post, seemingly out of thin air. His face was placid again, although it was difficult for him to resist smirking. That was pretty close, but you'll need to do better if you ever want to beat me. He ignored the bit of smoke curling from the back of his glove, which had joined the other almost injuries of the day. A clean slice had been taken out of his left pant leg, and an almost invisible spot of red indicated that he had been barely grazed by something that morning. The sole of his right sandal had been scorched and partially melted. He could feel a blister forming on the back of his hand from where the metal guard had been electrified and burned straight through the cloth beneath, but he ignored it. You're getting there, and it's certainly more than most could say, but not yet. He took a deep breath, folded his arms, and raised his voice. Again. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Well, I landed a punch today. It was nearly dark when Naruto slumped into a stool at Ichiraku. He felt drained and stiff from excessive chakra use, but as usual he showed none of the signs of wear that his friends did. Sasuke and Hinata were covered in scrapes, welts, and bruises from the grueling training, but neither paid the injuries much attention. We did get him a few times, Hinata said encouragingly, although even she looked a touch despondent. I'm not sure we're strong enough to beat him, though. I can see everything he's doing, Sasuke growled, clenching his fist on the countertop. I can follow every movement he makes, but I just can't keep up. Naruto shook his head. If we could combine your eyes and ninjutsu with my power, and those with Hinata's speed and precision, I think we'd stand a chance. As it is. The blonde shrugged, pausing to place his order with a yame. As it is. We might be really strong, but Kakashi-sensei's had 13 more years to train. He made a face and opened his mouth to continue, but Sasuke finished the thought for him. Not to mention that he's a veritable genius. He might not have been born with a Kekkei Genkei, but anybody who makes Jonin so young is a force to be reckoned with. Hell, he was a Chunin at 6 years old. We weren't even in the academy at that age. Things have changed a lot since the Third War, Hinata put in, staring down into her ramen as if to puzzle it out. I have no doubt that Kakashi-sensei had the skill necessary to be promoted so young, but the village was also training genin at a much earlier age than today. I would think. She paused, giving her head a shake before reaching for her chopsticks. I hope that we never have to see children become shinobi. No matter how skilled, it just seems wrong. Children. Naruto mused, pausing to slurp a mouthful of noodles. Hey, I guess we're not kids anymore after all. Hinata colored slightly, but nodded after a moment. They had earned their places among their peers and betters, and together had been through too much to still be considered children. Even if the reasoning is solid, Sasuke huffed, ignoring his meal, I still plan to beat him before the next exams. I'm going to go back to train after this, you two in. He received two determined nods in response, and the trio dug in with gusto. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. I can't believe his stamina, Sasuke thought irritably, easily dodging Naruto's orange blur of a fist. Easily, but not quite so easily as an hour before. He was tired and aching in more places than he thought existed in a human body. Still, it took the majority of his concentration to keep up with the blonde's assault, which only seemed to become more and more frenzied as time wore on. That, or Sasuke was just getting more exhausted by the second. The air felt thick for some reason, as if a heavy blanket of humidity lay over them in the crisp evening air. That sensation was second in his mind. He had a plan to execute, and precious little time left in his window to move. A body flicker got him out of the way of a kick right as Hinata's technique tore through the air, a blast of condensed air that could have split a goodly-sized tree in two. Naruto took it full on in the chest, flying back a dozen meters before a sizable boulder stopped him cold. Cracks blossomed like a spider web from the point of impact before Naruto slid to the ground with an audible thud. Sasuke let his Sharingan fade when the reddish flames began to die down around his opponent, signaling an end to the extended match. Naruto! Hinata gasped, appearing beside Sasuke as he dashed towards the rock. She looked much more worried than he felt. Naruto could and had taken much worse than that. The force that she had used told him that she had also noticed their friend's increased ferocity, however. Her stricken features combined guilt with concern, and he was sure that she was berating herself on the inside. Are you all right? Of course he's all right, Sasuke grumbled. His head's hard enough too. The rest of his words were drowned in an unnatural, guttural growl from where Naruto lay. The sound carried on a rising wind, and suddenly the thickness around them grew from a sluggish presence to a suffocating cloud. Red-orange light flashed, and once again Naruto was a torch of fiery chakra. What the? He was too slow in recalling his Sharingan. The sharp snap of breaking bone accompanied Sasuke's gasp as Naruto hit him, one arm trapped and broken between the charging boy and his own crushed chest. His breath left in a rush as he rocketed back, ricocheting off of two trees before colliding with a third hard enough to halfway uproot it. Flecks of black and white danced in his vision as he struggled to rise. The world was spinning, and his mind was still trying to catch up to what had just happened. His left arm lay limply by his side, and Sasuke knew without any prodding that it had been fractured in several places. What the fuck, Naruto? He wheezed, sagging against the tree for support. The ringing in his ears died down slowly, and his vision began to clear enough so that he could follow the rapid movements out in the darkness. Red and yellow streaks danced with deep violet and white, dizzying in their speed. It took Sasuke a few seconds to realize that there were two, now that he could make them out clearly, the two shapes were those of his friends fighting. This wasn't any normal sparring match. If the manner in which Naruto had hit him hadn't been clue enough, this cleared any doubts in his mind. It was odd, the things you noticed when dazed so completely. Without his Sharingan, Sasuke wouldn't have been able to appreciate just how fast Hinata had become. Any time he sparred with her he had been forced to counter that speed in some way, either by using weapons, ninjutsu, or genjutsu to slow her down, or some combination thereof. Of course, he had seen her move like this plenty of times before, but it always took him aback for a few seconds, and made him wonder how she got outpaced by Kakashi. Her fluid movements truly were like a dance, flowing from one stance to the next, attacking and defending with alacrity to outpace lightning. Sasuke would have stopped to be impressed for longer had he not noticed Naruto immediately after. The blonde wore a rictus snarl completely unlike his normal focused expression when in the midst of a fight. Reddish chakra roiled about him, lashing out as if of its own accord. Three tails bristled behind him like plumes of fire, writhing madly while trying to make room for a fourth. Worst of all, even worse than the additional tail, were Naruto's eyes. Somehow he had always managed to make even those malevolent red eyes seem jovial, but now they blazed with a heat that could only be fury and hatred, and they stared right at Hinata. Hinata, whom he loved. Oi! Sasuke yelled, stumbling forward. A few strides got his balance and strength back. Naruto. Snap out of it. He could feel that oppressive pressure all around the clearing now, and its origin could no longer be dismissed as a mystery. It was pure killing intent mixed with something more, something wrong. It was as if Naruto's, or rather, Kurama's, hatred had oozed out and mixed with the very air around them. Naruto. Naruto whirled at the sound of Sasuke's voice, a wordless noise akin to a peal of thunder escaping his throat. That simple loss of focus cost him 3 successive strikes from Hinata, landing on his side, chest, and shoulder. Bright blue light flashed at each impact, shreds of energy splashing away in swirls of lavender as the 2 chakras seemed to briefly combine before dissipating. Naruto staggered back a few paces, letting out a wordless roar of pain and outrage. The places Hinata had struck lacked the covering of Kurama's chakra, but even as Sasuke watched they began to fill in again. He's losing control, Hinata panted, her voice tight and almost shrill with her own panic. She pivoted while Naruto reeled, hands flashing through signs before familiar chains burst from her palms to wrap around her boyfriend. Help me hold him. Already the blonde was thrashing at the ethereal bindings with a rage that sent a chill down Sasuke's spine. Sasuke. Hinata's tone was definitely panicked now, although she hadn't even given him a second to work with. Easier said than done, he ground out, lifting his injured arm through stabs of pain and uncontrollable spasms. There didn't appear to be any nerve or tendon damage, thankfully, but even making slow seals sent jolts of fire up to his shoulder at every movement. Sweden. Water prison. He extended his good arm as the jet of water flooded from his mouth to surround Naruto, whirling into a sphere of liquid that could have held their sensei fast. Go get Kakashi sensei. No, Jiraiya sensei. He knows more about the seal. Huang dove down from above before Hinata could move, the bird's cry somehow communicating fear and sadness. The tips of her wings burned a faint blue instead of their typical yellow as if to further emphasize the unspoken emotion. The phoenix landed on Hinata's shoulder when the kunoichi released her technique, and she simply stood there watching the creature rather than running for Jiraiya. Hinata, Sasuke said sharply, gritting his teeth. He's not exactly easy to hold, even with this jutsu. Hurry up and get Jiraiya. Huang-san. Hinata began, her brow furrowing as she stared at Huang. I think she wants you to do something. Indeed, the phoenix was watching him instead of Naruto, those eyes of burnished silver intent on his own. Me? He asked incredulously, his gaze traveling back to Naruto. Within the prison the other boy quivered with effort, obviously trying to break free from the compressed water. I'm already holding him with this, and barely. Even as he spoke Naruto managed to jerk one arm up a few centimeters. Sasuke ground his teeth. Sweat slicked his face from the effort of holding the technique, and his arm had begun to shake. What more was he supposed to do? If Naruto had gone off the deep end, they needed somebody who could tamper with the seal or otherwise suppress the evil chakra. Something tickled at the back of his mind at that thought, and he suddenly remembered what Kurama had said what felt like so long ago. An Uchiha whose eyes don't seek to control my power. That had been what the fox had said. What exactly did that mean? The emphasis had clearly been on his clan name. Did that mean that the Uchiha had the ability to control a Biju? Eyes. That's all it could be. The Sharingan. His Kekkei Genkei was powerful, he knew, and it could cause a certain form of compulsion when used in a certain way, but controlling Kurama. Something else tugged at his mind. Something regarding the Kyuubi's attack on Konoha, but he brushed it aside. Won't know unless I try, he growled. Hey, shit for brains, look at me. Naruto jerked his head up to meet Sasuke's glare with one of greater intensity. Here goes nothing. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Sasuke knew very well how to apply a genjutsu using simple eye contact, but he knew it couldn't be the same trick. He kept eye contact, searching those red cat-like eyes for something, anything. Abruptly he felt something, like an invisible tug just beyond sensation. An inexplicable force pulled behind his eyes, and instincts guided the rest. A sensation of being ripped from his own body took him, followed immediately by falling through endless darkness. Falling. Falling. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. There was nothing to indicate that his downward motion had ceased, but after what felt like hours of descent into blackness, hours, yet consciously known to be mere seconds, Sasuke stood blinking at one of the oddest scenes he had ever witnessed. He had landed. Or rather, he had simply appeared, shin deep in an expanse of clear water. A steady dripping echoed around him, and an eerie golden light swathed the chamber from no discernible location. It was the type of soft, consistent light that he might expect to see in a dream, coming from nowhere but present everywhere save for above. A glance upward showed perfect and endless black. He swallowed. Red eyes of an Uchiha traveled down to view the massive gate that dominated the far side of the room, and between that and him. Naruto. Sasuke leapt forward, but he stopped several strides short of his friend. Naruto lay on his back in the water, staring with two wide, unseeing eyes into the darkness above. Reddish chakra oozed out of the water around him, appearing to come from some greater depth than Sasuke's feet could discover. The room at large held an unnatural coolness to it, but next to Naruto felt like standing beside an open furnace. Like on the outside, the chakra seemed to have a life of its own, boiling up and latching onto the Jinchuriki. It looked to be flowing into his open mouth and otherwise attempting to seep into his skin. So you did make it, a monstrous voice rumbled. Sasuke's head jerked up only to realize that a shape was moving beyond the gate. His eyes went up and up further still until he was looking into the blood-red eyes of the Kyuubi. He had seen the beast before, but this seemed a good deal more personal. This was technically its domain, after all. I guess I did, Sasuke shrugged. Now how can I help him? And why can't you do anything? Those eyes are reminiscent of another's, Kurama mused, going on as if the Sasuke hadn't said a word. Tell me, boy, have you heard of a man named Uchiha Madara? Who hasn't? He snapped, taking a step nearer to Naruto. A strand of chakra lashed out as if to strike him, falling short by a few centimeters. Can you help him or not? The fox made a noise deep in its throat, something that sounded half amused, half annoyed. Mortals are so irrationally hasty. The Biju lowered its head to its forepaws, regarding Sasuke with one enormous eye. I can't do a thing for the brat. The chakra I lend is one thing, but he took hold of the portion he can grasp on his own. It's mine, but at the moment it is separate from me. It feeds on his anger while simultaneously drawing out memories that instill yet more frustration and malice. It always tries to do that, of course, because the fool won't simply release my seal so that we can share full control of my power. It drives itself now that he's gone past what he can handle on his own. Great explanation and all, but isn't that bad? Sasuke was trying to remain cool and collected. The way in which Kurama spoke indicated that it wasn't a large concern, but then again the immortal had a very different view of what a problem was. If left unchecked, who knows what could happen? Sasuke blinked, and he could have sworn that the fox smirked at him. Maybe it will consume him completely and cause him to lose his sense of self. He could go berserk. It's also possible that he will continue to unconsciously draw more, damaging the seal further in his maddened state. If he does that, it's possible that he will be no more, and I will be free again. Now Sasuke understood, and now he was sure that Kurama was grinning at him somehow, a cold, calm smile. After everything that had happened, even after saving all of their lives and returning to his prison of his own will, the beast was openly considering this. But why? When he asked as much, coarse thunder bubbled around him in a semblance of a tremendous chuckle. Boy, do you think I invited you in here because I intended to allow such a thing to come to pass? I may want to be free, but Naruto is too interesting to destroy just yet. When I make a bargain, he growled, hackles rising as if to emphasize the point, I keep my end. I brought you here to help him, mortal, but if you see reason to convince the idiot to keep up his end, then so be it. That sounded much more like a suggestion to Sasuke, but he didn't voice the opinion. He wasn't sure how long Naruto was expected to hold out, and talking further was just wasting time. Great, so you can't help. What can I do? Use your Sharingan, you imbecile. Sure. Simple as that. Just use my Kekkei Genkei in a way that I never have before, in a way that I don't even have a hint of, to save my friend. Naruto said that you have an attitude, but I didn't expect you to be dense as well. How did you get here? Kurama asked in tones of mock patience. The sneer was all too audible in his words. Sasuke opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. How had he gotten there? He couldn't remember. The fox seemed to understand what the silence meant. You may be a fool, but you have passable instincts for a human. Pull your head out of the hole you've stuck it in and think, imbecile. Sasuke did think, deciding to ignore Kurama's quip in the process. How did I get here? No, not important. Think. But he had been told, in so many words, to use his instincts, which required no thinking. Acting on impulse, he stepped forward into range of one of the strings of chakra, which shot for him immediately. He snatched it out of the air and sent a surge of his own chakra through it, guiding the flow with his Sharingan without thought. The red-orange coagulation burst away from Naruto as if expelled by a strong gust of wind. It spread and dwindled rapidly into a fine mist, which settled back to the water before sinking below the surface. Naruto lay there for a time, still staring at nothing, but lacking the assaulting chakra. And then he blinked, and blinked again. Sasuke? He asked curiously, sitting up so suddenly that Sasuke took a quick step back. He eyed his friend dubiously, not yet sure if the blonde was free of the foreign influence. How did you get in here? I used my Sharingan, I guess, he began slowly, eyes flickering up to Kurama before settling back. It didn't seem that Naruto remembered. You went a little crazy outside, and we had to hold you down. Naruto frowned and rubbed at his temples, then shook his head ruefully. I remember sparring for a long time, and then something changed with Kurama's chakra. Then I woke up here. He stood carefully, wincing as he came fully erect. Did anybody get hurt? You broke my arm, and maybe a rib or two, but nothing serious, Sasuke replied wryly. It was only then that he realized that his broken arm wasn't actually broken. He lifted and moved it experimentally. Well, it's broken on the outside, anyway. Where is this place? My head, I guess, Naruto shrugged, shifting his feet in the water. Sorry, Sasuke. I'm not really sure what happened. I know you're daft, kid, but you're not that much a moron. Naruto turned to glare at the Kyuubi, but Sasuke's thoughts were elsewhere. Inside of Naruto's head, he looked around again, seeing everything for the first time. In his rush to help his friend, he hadn't thought about the implications of the foreboding chamber. The endless expanse above, the eerie lights, the prison holding Kurama, and the seal placed directly at the center of the bars. There was nowhere else he could have landed, and that thought pebbled his skin as a chill shuddered by. Not my fault if your stupid chakra has a mind of its own, Naruto was saying in a sharp tone. Sasuke shook himself and refocused on the conversation. Look, I'm just asking how I can avoid that happening later. You don't need to be a jerk about it. I told you how, fool, Kurama growled. To Sasuke, this sounded like an argument that had been rehashed time and time again, and one where neither expected to gain any ground. The more you draw on my chakra without my aid, the easier time it will have in twisting you to its will. With how much I give you, I could easily do it myself if I had half a mind to. As it is, you have two choices. Stop using my power so freely, or undo the seal so that you and I can work together and mold our chakras as one. Every time I suggest that we work together, you just make some snarky comment about it. Besides, didn't you say not too long ago that I would be wise not to forget that you're the Kyuubi? I'm trying to get Jiraiya-sensei to loosen the seal because I promised I would, but with the way you act all the time it feels like I'm making a big mistake. You think I would break my word? The fox said in a low, dangerous tone. Naruto set his jaw and opened his mouth to deliver what Sasuke was sure would be an unwise retort. I didn't come here to play mediator, Sasuke cut in quickly, fielding sharp looks from both parties. But as far as I can tell, you're both idiots. That was perfectly neutral, like any good arbiter should be. Pardon. Kurama rumbled, followed immediately by Naruto's offended, what? Look, Naruto, Sasuke began, grimacing at the water all around him. He would have sat down for this if there had been anywhere to do so. You did make a deal with Kurama, and you're not one to break promises. Naruto scowled and looked to be about to protest, but Sasuke continued over the beginnings of his outrage. He's saved your life a few times now, and even voluntarily re-entered his prison after you let him out to save the village. If nothing else can convince you, that alone should prove that Kurama keeps his word. The Kyuubi shifted his head to look at Sasuke with both eyes, blinking once. He looked surprised. You're taking his side? Naruto asked, sounding halfway between hurt and affronted. Sasuke held up a placating hand. I'm not taking any side. I'm just calling it how I see it. On that note, he continued, looking back to Kurama. You're an asshole. He expected more of a reaction to the blunt statement, but the fox only peered down at him from that great height. Perhaps the slightest quirking near the back of his lips, but that was all. Whatever your reasons or excuses, maybe you were born this way, or maybe it really has been what humans have done to you over the years. Whatever they are, you have to start looking at Naruto like a partner. If you keep up this, Naruto is too interesting to destroy yet. Crap, I wouldn't trust you either, no matter your promises. What is it that you propose, oh wise counselor? Hints of mockery practically dripped from Kurama's words, but Sasuke responded as evenly as if it had been genuinely asked. I think Naruto needs to stop dawdling and actually loosen the seal, he began, eyeing his friend askance. He didn't particularly like that idea himself, but he hadn't made the bargain. And don't say you're not, because Jiraiya's not the only one who can work Fuinjutsu at that level. You haven't even tried asking Tsunade or the Hokage. I mean Sarutobi-sama. Even after so long, it was difficult not referring to the man as Hokage. I bet they have an idea of how to help, or at least know an expert who could. Again Naruto scowled, but allowed a reluctant nod after a moment. And I already mentioned what you need to do, he continued, rounding on the Kyuubi. Not an easy thing to do when you were the size of the tip of its claw, but he managed to look annoyed nonetheless. You spend far too much time being nonchalant and mysterious. Naruto might not be the brightest. Hey, but he isn't stupid. Take the time to explain things to him. What else better do you have to do in here, anyway? Kurama made a noncommittal sound that Sasuke took for a grunt, even though it was loud enough to make his skull feel like it was vibrating. Instead of just sitting there when he's about to go overboard like just now, warn him, or, gods forbid, help him if you can. I almost told Naruto that he needs to respect you more, but Biju or not, you need to earn that with your attitude. You dare imply that my... Sasuke rolled his eyes and sped through a series of seals when the beast began speaking, putting a spin on the wind whisper technique. Yes I dare. You big furry lummox, Sasuke boomed, his voice echoing around the chamber to match that of the foxes. For his part, Kurama visibly balked, though either at being interrupted or from the volume, Sasuke couldn't tell. He went on in a normal tone, however, though with no less severe a glare. As far as he was concerned, it was high time things got in order in this place. Naruto's head, I guess. If you want your freedom to stretch your legs or whatever, you're going to need to view Naruto as an ally, as a friend, even. From what I've seen and heard, you don't look at anybody like that. So if you won't for the simple fact that he's not a bad guy to be friends with, then start trying because it'll help out with your goal. Silence held in the chamber for a long while. Naruto flashed him a quick, sheepish grin at his final statement, but otherwise stared Kurama down as intently as the fox watched him. I'm sure they've had this out countless times now, and covered the same things I just said. Why did I even put myself in the middle of this argument? How do I get out of here? The bubble of quiet was burst by the Kyuubi's snort, and along with the fleeing lull came a blast of air that had Sasuke and Naruto's coats whipping back for a few seconds. You two are a thorn in my side, but you at least know some sense. I'll see what I can do about my attitude. Sasuke blinked. That had come as a surprise, but the bigger shock came out of Naruto's mouth mere moments later. Yeah, Sasuke's right. Maybe I haven't really wanted to loosen the seal because I didn't trust you as much as I should. You have come through for me, for us, really, more times than I care to admit, and I guess, you do deserve more trust for that. Sasuke stared in disbelief. Had this been all they had needed to solve this argument, an outside perspective telling them both off and handing them the obvious? He shook his head slowly. This was truly ridiculous. Great. So, now that we've settled that, how the hell am I supposed to get out of here? His only response from Naruto was an apologetic shrug, and Kurama simply raised an eyebrow as if to say, isn't it obvious? Sasuke sighed and rolled his eyes before closing them, muttering under his breath about Biju and worthless friends. A sensation took hold of him as soon as he concentrated on departing, like an icy hand gripping the scruff of his neck and dragging him upward at an unthinkable speed. Abruptly Sasuke found himself stumbling backwards, gasping for breath as he sat down hard. The watery orb collapsed as soon as his hand left it, letting Naruto sink to the ground in the manner of a deflating balloon. Hinata looked between both of them before kneeling beside a very tired-looking Naruto, whispering a few words that Sasuke didn't quite catch before hurrying to him. What happened? She asked worriedly, her hands already surrounded in green light and searching for injuries. You just froze. It was like you had turned to stone, and you were staring at Naruto with a scary look on your face. Only for a second, but then Naruto's cloak was gone and she trailed off, not knowing exactly what had happened then. Only a second, huh? Sasuke muttered, allowing her to fuss over his broken arm. I guess I entered his subconscious using the Sharingan, and he relayed what happened in full while Naruto got to his feet and shambled over with a rueful look on his face. By the time he finished, Hinata was shaking her head and gingerly laying his arm back on his own lap. I can't heal this, Sasuke. We'll go with you to the hospital and get it fixed. She stood and offered him a hand, which he took gratefully with his good arm. Sorry, Sasuke. I really didn't mean to let it get out of control like that. Naruto did look truly chagrined, so much so that Sasuke bit back a, mostly, friendly jest. Mostly. I think I really need to cut back on using Kurama's chakra. I think just 2 tails until we can work on the seal more. Good. Sasuke smirked, punching his friend's shoulder none too lightly. Hinata and I both are barely a match for you with 3, so maybe we can go one-on-one if you hold back some. You two could beat me if you went all out. We don't use lethal force when we spar, and I know that both of you can do some real damage if you put your mind to it. If you used some of your more powerful ninjutsu, for example, or a really deadly combination with bukijutsu. I know Hinata could make one of my kidneys explode if she had half a mind too. He winked at her when he said as much, and her careful shrug and moderate flush gave away more than if she had said something self-deprecating. Either way, it's plenty of power to make it to the finals. The other teams have been training hard, I know, and I'm sure there will new tricks from the other nations, but I think we're pretty far ahead of the competition. Sasuke always thought it best to be confident, regardless of whether or not he saw his own statements as true. They were stronger than any of the other genin in the village, and of that he was positive. It seemed that most villages had 1 or 2 squads that were far and above the rest, but those they could deal with when the time came. His only concern was, what if we have to fight each other in the finals? Hinata asked quietly. She was smoothing her skirt and biting absently at her lower lip, but her tone was enough for Sasuke to see the concern. Then we fight, and we go all out, Naruto said cheerfully, taking one of her hands and giving it a squeeze. He laughed then, though it didn't sound like his full spirit was in it. I feel bad for whichever 2 of us has to fight before the final match. Even the winner will probably be too battered to put up a good fight in the last round. Good thing you won't have to worry about that, Sasuke jeered. You'll be busy sleeping off your first round loss in the infirmary. Hinata stifled a giggle, and Naruto started off a string of defensive comments interspersed between jibes at Sasuke's own predicted performance. As they walked into the darkness of the woods together, heading towards the hospital, Sasuke couldn't help but wonder about his own strength, and how much further he had to go in order to reach his goal. Am I strong enough yet? Will I ever be? Asterisk, 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 asterisk. You 3 certainly seem to have been pushing yourselves since Naruto returned, Hiruzen chuckled. It's only been 2 weeks, but I can tell that each of you has become stronger since then, although I would question your methods if you are sustaining such injuries. A knowing gaze lingered for a moment on the sling holding Sasuke's right arm against his chest. That was my fault, Naruto admitted quickly, bringing the teacup to his lips to provide a moment to think. His eyes cast around as if looking for a distraction, but all he saw were surroundings that reminded him of the purpose of their visit. It was a simple room. Sarutobi-sama seemed to like simple things, within the old man's home, the kotatsu at which they sat being the centerpiece. The walls were bare save for a framed photograph of the Sandaime himself standing behind 3 genin, all of whom were easily recognizable to Naruto. Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru were all so young in that picture. Who would have guessed that one of them would have gone on to hate the village so much as to try to annihilate it? Does it have anything to do with the surge of the Kyuubi's chakra that I felt last night? Hiruzen asked mildly, taking a sip of his tea as if the thought was of no concern. Naruto balked and hastily set his cup down before shoving a few burned fingers into his mouth. Spilling still scalding tea all over his hand did little to help get the right words out. Yeah, well, sort of. He rubbed at the back of his neck and glanced at Sasuke, who only shrugged. Hinata gave him an encouraging smile from his other side. Naruto took a deep breath and finally met the old man's eyes directly. Hiruzen was one of the few people who didn't flinch at the sight of his red eyes and slit pupils. The wizened third merely watched placidly, giving Neri a hint of being perturbed in the least. I can trust him with this, Naruto told himself, as if he hadn't decided that long since. It all came out in a rush. I lost control of the chakra and went on a little rampage, and if Sasuke and Hinata hadn't restrained me and stopped it, I don't know what would have happened. He got hurt in the process, but it wasn't that bad thankfully. The only thing that gave away Hiruzen's surprise was a blink. They stopped it. He mused, though it sounded like only a half question that had bubbled past thought to be vocalized. How did you two manage that? His calm yet serious dark eyes seemed to take in Hinata and Sasuke both, despite them sitting to either side of the man. Sasuke glanced at Naruto, though not seeking permission to speak. They had discussed this eventuality already. In short order Naruto's friends explained what they had done to detain him, and Sasuke skimmed over the part concerning Kurama and the chamber within his friend's subconscious. He spoke as if the details were unimportant, touching only on the major points of what he had done, and also pointing out that he was unsure how to replicate the techniques. I see. Hiruzen started slowly, glancing between the two genin again as if re-evaluating them. His expression still gave away nothing as he turned his attention back to Naruto. Judging by Sasuke's explanation, I can only assume that you're here for a reason other than to explain what happened. After all, even if you needed to, I am no longer the one to give such a report. Old people always seem to know what you wanted before you asked. Yeah, it's about the seal. I want to know if it's possible to loosen it, and if you'd be able to help me with doing it. At last some emotion broke through Hiruzen's mask of serenity. He visibly stiffened, and, although slight, his eyes widened at the properly insane-sounding inquiry. I sorta made a deal with Kurama during our mission to the Land of Waves. In return for saving my life 3 times, at that point, and in exchange for letting me use his chakra whenever I wanted to, I promised to do what I could to loosen the seal. In the meantime, I let him hang out in my head and talk to me when he feels like. I guess it helps him feel less confined or cramped or lonely, which is great because he's been really helpful since then. I've gotten a lot stronger with his help, and he saved my life again during the Chunin exams, and yours too, I think, after Kakashi-sensei suggested it, and also the village. And Naruto trailed off at a soft pinch to his right leg. He glanced at Hinata, who gave him a small smile and shake of her head. Only then did he fully realize the extent of his rambling, and he abruptly colored with embarrassment. That is interesting, Hiruzen said after a lengthy pause. His features had come back under control, but he still appeared troubled. He set his cup down and peered into the pale green liquid for a time, as if trying to divine his next words from the contents. I think that you are being inordinately considerate, Naruto. I can't think of anybody who would look to cooperate with a Biju, let alone befriend one. Even your mother kept a tight leash on Kurama when she was his Jinchuriki, although I suppose that her temperament could have accounted for some of that. He smiled fondly at the memory of Kushina, and Naruto found himself grinning as well despite the pang in his chest. However, I'm afraid that I cannot help you, and I'm surprised to say that I might if I were able. I thought this might pose a problem, Kurama muttered before Naruto could open his mouth to respond. He's not Hokage anymore, and I am considered property of the village. That means Tsunade's the only one who can make the call. We have to ask Tsunade-sama, don't we? Naruto said, echoing the Kyuubi's assumption. Giving up the post of Hokage comes with the benefits of retirement, Hiruzen smiled, but it does mean that I am no longer the one to approach with such matters of importance. I appreciate that you trusted me with this matter, Naruto, but yes, you will need to consult Tsunade. Naruto couldn't stop a sigh from escaping. It wasn't that he disliked the Godime. On the contrary, he liked Tsunade just fine when she wasn't being too bossy. It's easy to forget that the Kyuubi is considered a military asset, Sasuke sighed, sliding back from the table to stand. I guess we're just going to have to see Tsunade after all. Thank you for meeting with us, Sarutobi-sama, Hinata said meekly, bowing from where she had stood. We're sorry to have troubled you with this. The corners of Hiruzen's eyes wrinkled as he smiled, and a mirthful twinkle shone in his eyes. You three would be hard-pressed to trouble me, especially nowadays. I'm glad you stopped by to have tea. Next time I hope that you'll be able to stay longer. He remained seated, returning to sipping at his tea while Naruto got to his feet. Thanks, Sarutobi-sama, Naruto intoned before turning to follow his friends from the room. Naruto. Hiruzen's voice was pitched low for only their ears, though Hinata and Sasuke stopped just outside the door to peer back curiously. The retired Hokage peered over his cup with an unreadable expression, though Naruto could see the hardness that came from decades of being a shinobi etched in the man's features. It is good to want to keep your promises, but do not seek Tsunade's permission with too much optimism. It is a difficult and complicated thing that you ask, and more than just your honor is at stake. Naruto hesitated a moment before giving a slow nod, followed by a final bow. Damn that old man, Kurama grunted, though strangely the words held no heat. He sees more than most humans. I can't say that I didn't expect this, but I still don't like how it's turning out. You knew this would happen? Naruto asked flatly, shutting the door to Hiruzen's home behind him. Why did you say to ask him, then? The Kyuubi liked to play the mysterious immortal card more often than was amusing, he knew, but this had just wasted time. I'm not omniscient, you buffoon. Nobody can predict the future. Hiruzen has a soft spot for you, and it was a fair bet to see if he might act on his own. It was a small chance, but worth taking. Naruto closed his mental mouth. Perhaps it hadn't been a complete waste of time. So what if Tsunade-sama refuses? He asked. What do you expect me to do then? I expect you to keep up your side of the bargain, Kurama stated simply, and surprisingly with only the slightest flicker of annoyance. The fox didn't seem worried about Naruto's promise anymore, instead focusing on how it might be accomplished. If she says no, you'll just have to find another way to do it on your own. Naruto very much doubted that he could manage such a task, but he had given his word for better or for worse. Team 7 made the walk to the tower in silence, and Naruto was grateful for the time to think. Hinata's hand felt warm and comfortable in his, and every now and then she gave a little squeeze, though for whose benefit he couldn't say. It felt nice all the same. In no time at all they were climbing the stairs leading up to Tsunade's office, and Naruto found himself becoming increasingly anxious. It was a near foreign feeling for him. Aruka always said that his youthful cockiness and brash attitude had matured into confidence and steadiness, but really he had always just chosen a path and stuck with it. This confrontation would be personal, he couldn't think of another word for it. Kurama was a part of him. The jerk fox was his Biju, and likewise he was Kurama's Jinchuriki. A disturbing thought entered his mind at that line of reasoning, one that he was surprised had taken so long to come up. I'm the Jinchuriki of a captured Biju. I belong to the village. We all do, in a way, Sasuke shrugged. Naruto blinked, and only then realized that he had voiced his concern aloud. Think about it. Whenever a trained shinobi leaves the village without authorization, he's labeled as a rogue ninja until proven otherwise. We're military assets that can't be allowed to stray, at least when it comes down to it. I don't. Hinata began, pausing as an Anbu agent ghosted past them. She sat beside Naruto on the bench opposite Tsunade's office, and Sasuke mirrored her on the other side. I don't think that's entirely true. Well, I suppose it is in fact, but we're not just tools to be used by the village. Each of us went to the academy of our own volition, and though for different and individual reasons, we all had, and still have, a desire to protect the village. I can't think of us so coldly as that. We have a purpose, and we serve that purpose as best we can of our own choice. I think so too, Naruto said with a small smile, giving her hand a squeeze. Her fingers really did feel nice curled around his like that. But I think it's a little different for me. I mean. You both saw what Kurama's capable of. Hell, the entire village saw it, and some. Quote. He shook his head, remembering how many lives had been lost in the brief conflict within the village walls. No matter how many times he or the others insisted that it had been necessary, that incalculable lives been saved by the Kyuubi's actions, he could not just forget what devastation a mere footfall of a tailed beast could wreak. Anyway, even if nobody ever says it, I'm basically a sort of trump card for the village in case we ever go to war again. Don't look at me like that, Hinata, he grumbled, not meeting her stern gaze. I hadn't really thought much about it, but if Tsunade-sama wanted to, she could release the seal herself with or without my permission. Just like how Gara was used by Suna, me and Kurama could be used to fight some big battle in the future. All three of us might be weapons of the village, but I can't help but think about how much freedom I really have as a Jinchuriki. Silence fell over them again, though this time it was not the comfortable kind. Naruto could feel both of his friends watching him, but all he could do was shrug. It wasn't as if he had any problems with who he was, not many, anyway. He still wanted to protect the village and his friends within it. These two, Haku, Shikamaru, Sakura, all of them. Even if he had less wiggle room when it came to some things, and even if Tsunade really did just consider him a powerful weapon, he would still willingly fight for Konoha. It was his home, however much some of the citizens still loathed him. There was plenty still worth treasuring here. The Hokage will see you now. Naruto looked up to find Shizune peering across the hall at them, holding the door open to admit entrance. Do try to be quick. She is very busy right now. I'm surprised she agreed to meet you in the first place. Her tone was a touch testy, though Naruto supposed it was always like that when Tsunade shirked her duties. He was beginning to suspect that happened more often than not, even if it was not the case at present. He rose and filed in with Sasuke and Hinata, stepping into the center of the room with a friend on either side. Tsunade sat glowering at a parchment on her desk, with stacks of paper to either side of it that seemed in danger of toppling at any moment. She appeared to be in no mood for requests. What do you need? She all but snapped as soon as the door was closed. I've got a village to run and an exam to prepare for. Shizune might be taking care of the financial side of things, but I still have to approve all of the new infrastructure and building projects. Oh, and the permits, and the registration forms, and the mission requests, and. She trailed off irritably, eyeing the tower of documents on her left as if it were a mound of vipers. Anyway, I'm busy, so make it quick. Naruto winced, then took a deep, steadying breath. He hadn't let go of Hinata's hand, and he wasn't planning to. He needed the support. I want you to loosen the Kyuubi's seal so that he's not so confined, and because I promised him I would do it in exchange for saving my life and letting me use his chakra, he said, all in a rush, wincing again before the last words were out. He had thought to present the idea much as he had to Hiruzen, but it had all come out in a nervous spout that couldn't be taken back now. Tsunade's eyes sharpened, and she met his gaze evenly before her lips parted to say one firm word. No. Almost as if they had vanished from the room, Tsunade lifted her pen and filled it in the inkwell before bending back to her work. Naruto could only stand there staring, and after a few seconds he clicked his jaw shut from where it had been hanging agape. There had been no cushioning, no explanation, and hardly a breath of hesitation, and now he was as good as dismissed along with his plea. That's it, he demanded, unable to keep some of the outrage from his voice. Tsunade-sama, this is really important to me, and. I said no, Naruto, she replied sharply, not looking up from her writing. I already know that you've been trying to tamper with the seal, and I will neither aid you with it nor allow anyone else to. There are too many risks and far too few benefits to justify taking such an absurd course. I will not even chance endangering the village just because you promised Kurama some extra space in which to stretch his proverbial paws. No offense, Kyuubi-sama, she added with a half glance towards him. But you had to know that this wouldn't work. None taken, Tsunade-chan. The insult was clear in his derisive snort. Unsure of what to say or do, Naruto spun and stalked out of the room, a scowling Sasuke and pensive Hinata fast on his heels. The door didn't slam as they left, though only because Hinata was the last out. Tsunade leaned back in her chair and sighed heavily, tossing the pen onto the desk and spattering a few droplets of ink across the page she had been working on. This was just what she had needed. It was hard enough keeping up with everything that needed doing without adding a frustrated genin to the mix. A frustrated Jinchuriki, rather. She rubbed at her temples with one hand while the other flicked a signal towards an innocuous wall panel. The wood appeared to bulge outward for an instant before resolving into the kneeling form of an Anbu shinobi, his face cast down respectfully. A mask resembling a cat covered his features, with green and red markings along the outside and by the eyes. Report. There seems to have been no further incident since last night's mishap, Hokage-sama, although it seems that the boy is growing more determined to loosen the Kyuubi's seal. As I stated, he mentioned using the chakra to a lesser extent until a favorable solution could be found, but he seems impatient. There is also a matter of their conversation in the hallway. Shizune already detailed that for me, Tsunade barked, then took a deep breath and took a firm hold on her frustration. No, it was past frustration, if not quite outright anger. What was she going to do about the child? Just keep monitoring him. And next time he loses control, intervene before somebody gets hurt. The man only nodded once before melting into the floorboards, no doubt off to shadow Naruto again. Tsunade grunted in disgust at herself. I sound like I expect him to go into a frenzy again. Is this really the right thing to do, Shizune? I don't know, Tsunade-sama, the other woman said quietly, still watching the door with a decidedly disgruntled expression. I want to believe that the Kyuubi is on our side and that we can trust Naruto to gain control if he isn't, but. Shizune shook her head, patting Tauntaun's head absently. The small pig oinked contentedly in her arms, and Tsunade envied the animal for its tranquility. Sarutobi-sensei trusted his advisors, and even Danzo to as much an extent that he could, anyway. The man's a snake, but I believe that he has the village's best interests in mind. Still, even with all three of them agreeing for once, I can't help but feel like we're making the wrong decision here. Tsunade rubbed at her head again. She was beginning to think that headaches were just one of the perks of being Hokage. Some things are out of your hands, even as the Godime. All we can do is wait, hope that our choice is the right one, and be prepared to accept responsibility in the event that it isn't. Shizune shrugged uncomfortably, making it clear that, despite her confident words, she had the same reservations as Tsunade. Wait and see, Tsunade murmured, shaking her head before retrieving her pen. A cold shiver ran down her spine, and it was a long while before she was able to settle back to her work. Chapter 28. No matter what. We've been getting so close. Naruto hissed through clenched teeth, digging his claws into the tree bark. He was lying flat on a high branch just behind a screen of leaves, all but glaring through them at where Kakashi stood at the center of the now all too familiar clearing. He couldn't hear even the slightest rustle of foliage or cloth to indicate that his friends were nearby, but he knew where they were. An icy wind cut through his white cloak and coat beneath, chilling him to the bone. He ignored it, just as he had for the last few hours. The sun was still high in the sky, perhaps a few hours past midday, and the hollowness in his stomach reminded him of their quick breakfast half a century ago. I've been watching him for almost a month of this now, Sasuke growled in a low, dark tone. The other boy's voice came to Naruto's ear as clear as if they were side by side thanks to the wind whisper technique, though it was more likely that the Uchiha was at least a dozen meters off in another tree. He doesn't make any mistakes and he's faster than Hinata on her best day. No offense, Hinata. A tiny sound was all that he got in response from her. Naruto supposed it sounded like a distracted murmur of, none taken. He had become fairly adept at interpreting his girlfriend's nonverbal sounds. What is it, Hinata? He asked softly, not taking his eyes from Kakashi. I think. She started. I think I have something that can work. It's going to take perfect execution and precision, but. Naruto could almost see her chewing her lower lip, and he smiled to himself. No matter how confident in herself Hinata had become, he thought she might never lose that bit of uncertainty. It wasn't the worst thing in the world. she was just naturally humble. That's more than I've got, he and Sasuke said almost in unison, and Sasuke continued a beat later. We've exhausted every formation and plan we've ever made, and none of our new ones have worked. I don't mind taking a breather to do some plotting. Your ideas are always great, Hinata, Naruto said brightly. She actually managed to click her tongue at his obvious attempt at encouragement, though how without making any noise was beyond him. Still, she did sound more sure of herself as she began the explanation. As Naruto listened, his grin grew wider and more devious. Hinata would make a frightening tactician one day. The third training ground was very still as Hinata stepped out from the tree line, but that was to be expected. These skirmishes always began silently. A thin layer of snow covered the outskirts of the open area, blanketing the surroundings in white. As her eyes traveled to the three posts at the center, however, signs of their previous bouts became ever more apparent. Swaths of snow and dirt had been scorched away by some fire technique or another, and projectiles riddled the ground in a haphazard layer of metal. All of the snow at the very center had been scoured away by rapid movements and yet more jutsu. Hinata took it all in at a glance, for that was all the time she had. Kakashi vanished from the center post, and almost before she lost sight of him a ball of fire burst out of the trees on her right, forcing her into a diving roll and to come up sprinting. Every so often he decided to strike first, and she was relieved that he had attacked from her right. Naruto and Sasuke were likely in position by now, and she had to make sure Kakashi was in the correct place. It will work, she told herself. Naruto and Sasuke have faith in me. Stealing her resolve, she set the trap in motion. Her flight from the fireball had been purposefully angled towards the center of the clearing, though nearer parallel to the trees than if she had been running for the posts. She could see their instructor clearly, only 30 meters away and crouched behind a tree, but he knew that she could see him as well. That was part of the plan. Shugohawk. 64 palms. She skidded to a halt while still appropriating chakra for the technique, and was already spinning when the kunai and shuriken left the bushes. This she hadn't specifically accounted for, but if this was going to be their all-out attempt then she wasn't about to keep any chakra in reserve. The weapon streaked towards and past her, though she knew by now that those in front were a mere distraction. Needlepoints of chakra deflected projectiles from all sides as she whirled, those thrown past angled so that one of every pair would rebound off of another to shoot back towards her. Her Byakugan-enhanced eyes let her see the last one leave Kakashi's hand. She had become accustomed enough to her Kekkei Genkai that she could predict several seconds into the future when it came to moving objects, and she slowed her rotation at precisely the right time. Her left hand swatted away a shuriken while her right caught a kunai handle and flung the weapon back from whence it came. She wasn't even close to finished with her part yet. Hokage. Chains of light. Hokage. Ethereal Senbon barrage. A silver-white chain flew from her left hand as her right began to glow and release burst after burst of Senbon aimed carefully to force Kakashi to her left, though not done so obviously as to allow him a hint of her motive. The chain's purpose was to suggest a second direction, up. She nearly raised a joyous cry as it flashed around the left side of the tree, forcing the Jonin to flee from his cover in a vertical leap. It was the real Kakashi so far, not a clone or substitution. Just one more step, and then it's up to you too. Hinata brought her hands down to the ground, ignoring the frozen slush and mud that instantly numbed her already chilled fingers. Sweden. Obscuring fog. She whispered fiercely. The ground beneath Kakashi became shrouded in a thick mist before he reached the zenith of his leap. She had used the water already present in the snow to great effect, but she didn't wait around to get caught in the upcoming crossfire. It was up to Sasuke now while she took care of the final details. Sasuke was on point with his timing, though he had to admit that Hinata had set him up so perfectly that it would have been impossible to miss the opportunity. He made his move as soon as Kakashi broke away from the trees, flinging two fists of shuriken in wide arcs to either side of his instructor. It would be difficult for the Jonin to see the wires attached to them, even considering his Sharingan. Sasuke wasn't about to allow Kakashi an opportunity to notice them, however. He reached out to his side as soon as the shuriken were loosed, his palm facing down towards an unrolled parchment. A Fuma shuriken appeared in his hand and was released straight towards where Kakashi would be several fractions of a second later. Raiden. Lightning shuriken. Electricity flowed through the new weapon's attached wire and lit it up like a beacon. Hinata had indicated that this sequence should be as elaborate as he could make it to serve as a distraction from their real intent. Can't make it much flashier than that. Sasuke leapt from his perch with as much force as he could muster, aided by chakra focused into his legs and feet. Even as he jumped, he guided the two groups of shuriken to nearly encircle Kakashi so that they all sped towards him at once while the larger weapon streaked straight on. He severed the wires with deft flicks of his wrists so that his hands would be free to begin speeding through seals. Kaden. Great fireball. The mass of fire left his lips as he passed directly over Kakashi, aimed straight down at the top of the man's head. Sasuke's hands were still moving through yet more seals, and his eyes were still locked on Kakashi. As his arc completed and he began to descend on the other side, he twisted so that he would still be facing Kakashi's back. Kaden. Fire lance. The narrow jet of fire shot towards the Jonin's back, and if his timing was accurate then it would strike at the same time as the fireball and Fuma shuriken. The entire maneuver had taken only seconds to execute, but he had known that those seconds allowed Kakashi plenty of time to assess and react appropriately. That was why the array had been so tightly controlled, to cut off every possible exit save for one. Even if Kakashi had all the time in the world to act, he would still be forced to avoid or cancel out the ninjutsu and dodge or deflect the projectiles. They were counting on all of that. Kaden. Great fireball. Kakashi spun to face upward as the gout of flame erupted from his mouth, and Sasuke suppressed a smirk. It wasn't the method that he had anticipated, but it would do. The technique had been infused with the same amount of chakra that Sasuke had put into his own, thereby canceling out both abilities in a blast of heat. Kakashi's had a secondary purpose, however. The explosion of fire served as a propellant to speed his descent, allowing the Fuma shuriken to whir past half a meter above his chest and the fire lance to scorch through where his head had been. The clusters of shuriken met in a clatter of metal, those that didn't pass by harmlessly falling towards the ground. Sasuke disappeared into the fog and lost sight of Kakashi, but he had accomplished his task. After I force him into the open, Hinata had said, you need to make sure he comes down into the mist while we prepare the rest. Then move to your next position. He landed on ground that felt solid enough, though the shroud was so thick around him that it was impossible to see much further than his own outstretched hand. Your move, Naruto. Naruto didn't have time to stop and admire his friend's handiwork, though he would have if it were possible. Instead he merely waited until the fog rose up beneath Kakashi, then dashed into it from the cover of his hiding place in the underbrush. Hinata had said that this was the crux of the plan, the most important part, she had explained, and his positioning was vital to it. He had tracked Kakashi's jump and anticipated where he would land, although the unnatural cloud coverage made it difficult to be exact. Naruto stopped where he thought was the correct place. He looked around, but there was little to see save for white nothingness. This'll have to work. He waited. Suppressing his chakra was a real effort, but he couldn't allow his teacher to sense anything before it was too late. Likely Kakashi knew he was there, or at least somebody was, but hopefully he wouldn't expect what Hinata had planned. An explosion overhead indicated that his time for action was fast approaching, and he readied himself for what was to come. By the sound of metal clashing with metal, he had positioned himself just right. He waited. Gotta be patient. Gotta be patient. Another thing Hinata had mentioned was that, while his positioning relative to hers was important, he had to be sure to wait until Kakashi landed to act. It was time to rely on her eyes. 2 clones, 5 meters ahead, he heard Hinata say through the wind whisper jutsu. One at your 12, the other 2 at your 11 and 1 o'clock. Hinata's words came so fast that he nearly missed what she meant, especially with so many numbers in one breath. It seemed Kakashi had suspected something. The Byakugan couldn't differentiate between shadow clones and the genuine article, he knew, so he would have to improvise as well. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 2 more Narutos appeared. They immediately leapt a few paces to either side and clasped their hands in ram seals just as Naruto did. There wasn't time for a technique now, though his backup plan would work just as well. The clones would have signaled to Kakashi that somebody was there, but the sound of 3 sets of feet hitting the ground told Naruto that it was too late for his sensei to react anyway. 3 blasts of chakra expelled the dense fog like a windstorm sweeping away chaff. A triad of brilliant blue lights marked Naruto and his clones out immediately, and the shockwaves from their abrupt release of suppressed chakra caught Kakashi and his two bunshin from behind. A pair of smoke clouds indicated which were the fakes, and the one on Naruto's left was sent flying forward with an audible grunt. Hinata had moved as soon as the fakes had dissipated, dashing to intercept the real Kakashi before he could recover. A softly glowing sphere of silver blue light flickered away from where it had surrounded her. She had used the chakra web technique to block the energy that Naruto had released. He grinned and rushed forward even as he heard Hinata call out, "Hokage! 64 palms." Hinata's first strike hit square in Kakashi's chest, stopping his forward movement with a particularly intense surge of chakra into her palm. His eyes widened in surprise, but only for an instant. The next moment his hands were flashing towards one another, but she wasn't about to allow him to use another jutsu. 2 strikes. 4 strikes. She persevered, pushing for more speed even after she had reached her limit. It was enough, if barely. Kakashi could read her movements, and he had the reflexes and swiftness to complement the Sharingan's sight, but she was just fast enough to force him to defend the technique and not work any hand seals. Hurry, she thought, wondering how she sounded breathless in her own mind. She had used more chakra in the last few minutes than she had in the previous few hours combined. Abruptly Kakashi faltered, one hand clutching at his chest where her first blow had fallen. She hardly had time to be concerned that her aim might have been off. Instead she took advantage of the opening and halted her ability mid-jab, using the forward momentum to instead pivot and bring a lightning-quick spinning heel kick into the side of his head. That hadn't been part of the strategy, but it was too good an opportunity to pass up, and the ability to adapt on the fly was part of being a shinobi. Her heel connected hard, and though she didn't have near the power that her teammates possessed, it was still plenty of cause Kakashi to stagger a step to one side. That was all the opportunity that Naruto had needed. She had been watching through Kakashi with her Byakugan while Naruto had been sprinting towards them, covering himself in Kurama's chakra enough to bring out 2 tails. He extended both hands upon arrival, and the reddish chakra stretched forward like a pair of monstrous claws. It was one of the newer things that the Kyuubi had taught him, and he had taken to it like everything else he was learning. The 2 new hands clasped tightly around Kakashi, pinning his arms to his sides and covering him from mid-thigh to shoulder. Hinata spared a quick smile for Naruto, but this wasn't quite the end of their plan, and she was glad to have thought just one step further. A frightening amount of chakra flared from Kakashi then, enough to rival Naruto's earlier display. She hadn't readied her shield, and as such could only cross her arms in front of herself and be tossed away. "Hold on, Naruto," she cried into the gale created by the Jonin's surge. Her back hit a tree and she gasped, the air leaving her lungs in a rush. Through her winds she managed to catch sight of Naruto, still holding fast to Kakashi with a look of dogged determination etched on his face. Thick tendrils of Kurama's chakra had sprouted from his feet and legs and plunged into the ground, providing him an anchor while the 2 tails had gone back to dig into the cold earth, bracing his upper body against the force. As suddenly as it had come, the chakra disappeared. Kakashi let out another grunt as he was pulled straight down into the ground and effectively buried up to his neck. Sasuke burst up in a shower of dust and rubble, breathing hard but wearing the broadest smirk Hinata had ever seen on him. She dashed forward despite her own lack of adequate air, kunai in hand. She shoved its point under Kakashi's chin, and only then noticed that Sasuke had one positioned on one side of his neck while Naruto held another poised at the base of his skull. The dust and tumbling debris settled into a tense silence. Hinata heard her own breath loud in her ears, and the sound was echoed thrice more by her friends and instructor. She didn't take her eyes off of Kakashi's, however. Too many times they had thought themselves victorious when instead they had captured a clone or substitute. This time, though, she was sure. It had to be Kakashi. It has to be. Well done, Kakashi panted at last, closing the eye containing his Sharingan in what looked like a wince. Very well done, Team 7. His congratulations dispelled all of the tension in the air, as well as what she had been holding within. Hinata fell back to sit hard on the ground, allowing herself to take deep, appreciative gulps of air. She heard Naruto raise a cheer, and thought Sasuke muttered something like, "It's about damn time," but all that mattered to her at the moment was breathing. "Would you mind letting me out of here? This technique is far from comfortable, and I think one of my ribs may be broken." Despite her condition, Hinata felt her face heating. "I'm sorry, Kakashi-sensei," she said between breaths. "I didn't mean to hit so hard." She struggled up to one knee in order to use a simple earth technique to shift the ground around, but Naruto put a hand on the top of her head and shook his own firmly. "I'll do it. You and Sasuke used a lot more chakra than me. Rest," he insisted, and she managed a tired but grateful smile for him before sinking back down. She was tired, and the thought of using even the most minor technique got her head spinning. If Kakashi had been able to execute just one jutsu in those final moments, all of their efforts would have gone to waste. But then, she supposed that was the point to outmaneuvering a stronger opponent, leave no opportunity to counterattack. Naruto made quick work of freeing their sensei, utilizing Kurama's chakra to dig furrows around Kakashi before lifting him out with one oversized red-orange claw. He hadn't quite mastered the manipulation yet, a fact that Hinata could see in his expression. She thought Naruto looked cute when he concentrated like that, but she wasn't about to say so in front of everybody. They teased the two of them enough without her encouragement, and she wasn't sure that she had the energy to blush right then. That was unexpected. Kakashi sighed, stretching and flexing his muscles as if to test to see if they still worked properly. A four-part plan with a fifth contingency, if I read it correctly. "I regret using the decapitation technique in front of Sasuke," he said wryly. "Still, you all executed it well. I take it this was one of Hinata's plans. It was too complicated for Naruto, and Sasuke would have been more direct." "Yep," Naruto stated proudly, smiling down at her in a way that made her feel decidedly warm inside. "We couldn't have done it without her, either. She told me where you and your clones were when you landed, and she had to be the one to flush you out since she knew exactly where you were. Yeah, and she's the only one of us fast enough to keep you from using hand seals in combat," Sasuke put in. Apparently Hinata did have the energy to blush, because she felt her cheeks heating up as their praise went on. "I just came up with the idea," she protested. They thought up their own methods of accomplishing what they needed to. "Humility is a wonderful trait, Hinata," Kakashi said with an ill-hidden smirk. "But there's no need to downplay your own accomplishments. You all defeated me together, though, and for that you deserve to be congratulated. I'll take you all out to a nice hibachi after the exams are through to celebrate your accomplishment, all right?" He tugged his Hittite back down over his left eye, then winced again and felt at his chest. "Even if the second stage wasn't tomorrow, I'd still give you the rest of the day off. As it is, you three need to get as much rest as possible. Remember, the exam is going to be held at the Badlands north of Konoha. If you want to be there well before 8, you'd best sleep early tonight. You're only allowed to bring your ninja tools and the clothes on your backs, got it?" "Yes, sensei," they all said together. He nodded once, then disappeared into the trees. From the direction he was heading, Hinata thought that the hospital might be his destination. She felt bad for using too much chakra in that initial blow to his chest, but her elation at their success far outweighed the shame of that one mistake. "That was awesome, you guys," Naruto exclaimed, moving from wrapping Sasuke's knuckles with his to lifting Hinata off the ground and spinning her in a delighted circle. She let out a squeak of surprise, but a second later she was laughing along with him. Naruto's enthusiasm was as boundless and contagious as always. It was one of the things she loved about him, one of the many things. "Where is Huang-san?" she asked when he set her down on her own feet. Normally the creature would have come swooping out of the trees as soon as their training session had concluded. She took hold of his hand before realizing it, but such things had become so natural that they hardly received a thought anymore. "She hardly leaves your shoulder unless you're training or ask her to do something for you, and I haven't seen her this morning." Hinata had begun to feel a bit uncomfortable about the phoenix. Not in a truly bad way, she didn't think, but it had become clear long ago that the animal was not only sentient, but highly intelligent. As such, it felt a touch awkward at times when her and Naruto were alone, and Huang was simply there watching. She knew it was silly. What care should the bird have? Still, she hadn't been able to shake the feeling. Oh, she went back to Mount Hyuchi last night. I found out that she can go back whenever she wants to, like a desummoning or something. I thought she might want to be with her dad and around fire and stuff instead of stuck with me all the time, so I asked her to go back until I call her. Apparently Fong-sama wasn't too thrilled about it. He had wanted her watching over me or something, but it's all okay now. Sorry, he added, scratching behind one ear and looking genuinely embarrassed. I forgot to tell you last night because we ah. His cheeks colored and he went on while pointedly ignoring Sasuke's rising eyebrow. And this morning I wasn't really thinking about it because of our training. Hinata blinked, then schooled her features, and blushed, so that she wouldn't appear too pleased, or abashed. She had forgotten all about the Phoenix until now, similarly distracted by the day's main event. Well, at least they wouldn't need to worry about being spotted out during the exam now. Sasuke had raised the question last week, and Naruto had agreed that, should the test be similar to the last one, they wouldn't want a fiery beacon following them around. Come on, Sasuke said, pulling his cloak a little tighter around himself. It's cold out here, and I feel like I haven't eaten in a week. I never thought I'd say this, but nothing sounds as good as Ichiraku right now. Naruto guffawed and voiced his wholehearted agreement while Hinata simply nodded and smiled. One of her favorite parts of every day was eating with her friends after training. The food always tasted better after so much hard work, and dining at Ichiraku always brought her back to the first time Naruto had invited her and Sasuke there after a long morning of training in the summer heat. That had been their first summer together. Has it really been 4.5 years? Hinata thought wonderingly. She found herself squeezing Naruto's hand and receiving a squeeze in return. Yes, they were going on 5 years now of being friends. They had gone from children training in their first year at the academy to some of the strongest genin in the village. Even she had to admit that, although Kakashi's claims of them being at least Chunin level in some ways was pushing it, she felt. All of them had come so far and survived so much. And we'll keep progressing. Together. No matter what. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. What remained of daylight passed all too quickly following their departure from the third training ground. Naruto supposed that it was like when you had to wait for certain things. When the upcoming event was something to look forward to, time tended to crawl by. When it was something daunting or otherwise disconcerting, an entire day could be gone before you knew it. It wasn't that he was precisely nervous about the exam, he was looking forward to it. But his recent struggles with Kurama's chakra provided him an extra reason to worry, at least aside from the more important concern that this portion of the test could literally be deadly. It was his friends that he worried about, as always, but he had also promised Hinata that he wouldn't disappear again, and he always kept his promises. Lunch had passed in a flash, with both Hinata and Sasuke marveling at how much ramen he could eat in one sitting. He couldn't help it. Training made him hungry, and Ichiraku's ramen was so good that he could eat buckets of it for every meal. He thought that he had done well in restraining himself. There had only been a stack of 10 bowls in front of him by the time they left. And maybe he had helped Hinata finish off her second, and final, bowl. Honestly, he couldn't understand how she could function on so little food. Sasuke had only smirked all the while, having consumed a mere 3 bowls himself. Every now and again the jerk offered a snarky comment, such as, "I hope you pay for Aruka's groceries," or, "I think you could out-eat Choji." Naruto supposed that Sasuke's perpetually empty stomach was why he scowled so often. They parted ways after the midday meal. Sasuke headed back to his apartment to relax for the rest of the day, though not before Hinata got in a bit of teasing about his spending quality time with Haku, whatever that was supposed to mean. After Sasuke left, muttering under his breath until he was out of earshot, Hinata had suggested they take a walk around the inside of the village wall. Naruto was happy to agree. He loved spending time with Hinata, whether it was training or eating or just walking. She made him feel warm inside just by being around. He supposed that was what it meant to love somebody. It was definitely a part of it, he was certain. It took some time to stroll the perimeter of Konoha with Hinata. Several hours, in fact, judging by the sun. It sat just above the western horizon as they meandered back towards their starting point, a golden ball that provided little warmth against the winter's chill. Naruto didn't mind the cold much, especially with Hinata's arms slipped beneath his cloak and wrapped around his waist. She had told him more than once since he had returned that he felt warmer than she remembered, but he chalked that up to the sudden coming of winter. Things always felt warmer when it was cold out. He wasn't about to do anything to dissuade her from pressing against his side. Anyway, it felt too nice. Do you think we'll all be promoted? Hinata asked as they turned onto a familiar bridge leading towards the inner village. Conversation had kept up the whole way, moving from training and their success against Kakashi to other things like their friends, if their weapons were properly sharpened, food, and twice to a different type of conversation that involved Hinata pushing him into some underbrush. He didn't mind any topic, most certainly not the last. He had thought at first that he would have to be the one to instigate those sorts of things, but she had surprised him in more ways than one since they had confessed to one another. It was one of the many things about her that made butterflies dance in his stomach. Definitely, he replied confidently. I mean, we're easily the strongest genin in the village, and probably stronger than any other village's genin now. Well, I think Team Guy could give us a run for our money if they've been training as hard as we have, but I still think we'd kick their ass, kick their butts. He flashed a sheepish grin at her. She clicked her tongue, but it sounded more affectionate than chiding. I could see why they might not promote me, but you and Sasuke are both a shoo-in for sure. Why wouldn't they promote you? Hinata asked. To Naruto, it sounded like she was trying to come off as merely curious, but he could hear the note of chagrin in her tone. He shrugged. I'm not saying that I'm not good enough, he started carefully, knowing that she would call him out on selling himself short if he had meant that. I know I learn fast, and I'm physically the strongest of the three of us. I can match Sasuke's speed on my good days, too. My chakra control is great thanks to you, and I've got a crazy amount of the stuff to make up for what I don't have in variety. On that note, I can outlast anybody in the village, I bet. She smiled at him then, a gesture that he readily returned. Hinata liked it when he noted his own qualities. But, Tsunade-sama knows about Kurama's chakra, and I'd be willing to bet a lot more people know by now. If they think I'm unstable, or just unreliable, they might choose not to promote me. A chunin has to be able to think clearly and lead other teams sometimes, and there's no room for one of my episodes, at a time like that. I can see them waiting until I figure it out before thinking about promoting me. But that wouldn't be fair, Hinata insisted, stopping near the center of the bridge to face him. She rarely got upset, and much less frequently became angry, unless it was on his behalf. Right now she certainly seemed halfway between worried and cross, with her brow slightly furrowed and her lower lip firmly between two canines. She folded her arms and seemed to search for her next words before going on. Tsunade-sama refused to help you with the seal. We already decided that she must have a good reason. She must, Naruto, she said again. He wiped the scowl from his face. But I can't see her disallowing your promotion based on that. She knows that you're responsible, and she knows that you're not going to use more of the Kyuubi's chakra than you can handle. It's not her that decides though, is it? He didn't want to sound down about it, but it was difficult not to. Becoming a chunin was the next step in his goal of becoming Hokage one day, and it was kind of depressing thinking that he might be left behind by his friends. Well, not left behind, he knew that they wouldn't abandon him. But if they were promoted and he was passed over, they would be sent off to lead missions while he was likely assigned to a new team of genin. The prospect made him frown as he watched the icy water flowing beneath the wooden planks underfoot. The judges decide. She's one of them, sure, but we don't know how many others there might be, and how many of them might just hate me because of what I am. Naruto. Hinata moved beside him, slipping her fingers between his in a tight grasp. Her touch felt as warm as ever despite the frigid air. She looked at him as if at a loss for what to say, but wanting to say something or offer some comfort. It was enough for him that she wanted to help, and that she was close. I'll just have to show them how amazing I am, and then they won't have any other choice but to make me a chunin too. Right. He gave her his best grin, already sorry that he had allowed himself to show his dejection. She shook her head and returned a small, sad smile. It's okay to be afraid, Naruto. No matter what happens, I'll be here for you. We all are, Sasuke, Aruka-sensei, Haku, Kakashi-sensei, all of us. It'll all turn out okay. She shifted close to wrap her arms around his waist, and he barely hesitated in circling his arms around her as well. I know. Thanks, Hinata. He kissed the top of her head, and she responded by nuzzling the nape of his neck. Let's head back home. I'm sure Aruka-sensei could use help with dinner. He said he wanted to make us something special tonight. Hinata released him and nodded, brushing her own kiss on his cheek. He could feel the heat rising in his face as he reached for her hand and started off into the village, but he had long since decided that the blushes might just never fade. That wasn't the important thing right now anyway. What was important was that they were together, and always would be. No matter what. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Aruka had indeed planned something special for them, although it was prepared by the time they were able to arrive home and get cleaned up. He had gone all out to make their favorites, including red bean soup, grilled squid, fried rice, and even Hinata's cinnamon rolls for after. There was an additional surprise after they had finished eating, though it was meant for neither of them. Kuchio's no jutsu. Naruto touched his palm to the floor at the center of the kitchen, creating the temporary lines of jutsu shiki that always came with the technique. A burst of white smoke cleared almost immediately, sent through an open window by one of Hinata's very minor vacuum palms. Huang crooned and swept over to Naruto's shoulder immediately, settling down as if she had never left. Heya Huang-san. Aruka-sensei got you something. You didn't need to summon her. Aruka laughed, rubbing his hand on the back of his neck and looking embarrassed. But I suppose it would have gone bad otherwise. Here you go, Huang-san. He held out a sizable flank of raw steak that smelled strongly of something. Naruto knuckled his nose and made a face. Aruka-sensei, what did you put on that? He glanced at Hinata, who shrugged and stifled a giggle. I did a little research, the Chunin said defensively. I could only find legends of phoenixes at the library, but all of the tales say that they eat like any other bird of prey, but also prefer to eat rare resins where they can be found. He blinked then, eyeing Huang and looking a bit worried. Of course, they were just tales. It's possible that, abruptly the phoenix spread her wings and departed from Naruto's shoulder, sweeping across the kitchen and snatching the dangling flank from Aruka in one smooth movement. She whirled and alighted on the sink faucet, then fixed her gaze on Naruto. She says thank you. Naruto grinned, then nodded at the creature. Yeah, you can go back and share it with your dad. Tell Fong-sama that I said hi, and that I might need him in the next few days. Huang tilted her head one way, then the other, and then vanished in a flash of fire that left little specks dancing in Naruto's vision. That was very thoughtful of her, Hinata commented, still studying the spot where Huang had disappeared from and blinking rapidly. It seemed that he hadn't been the only one too slow to close his eyes. I'm not sure how she intends to share it with Fong-sama if he's as big as you say he is, but still nice of her to think of him. They're each other's only family, if I understand it correctly, Aruka put in, turning to start gathering dishes from the table. The books I read indicated that the lifespan of something plays into how many offspring it's able to produce. If phoenixes really do live forever, then I suspect Huang-san is the only child Fong-sama has ever had, and perhaps the only one he ever will. It's no wonder that they're close. Yeah, families are nice. Naruto smiled and took Hinata's hand. He winked at her, then quirked an eyebrow when her eyes went a little wide and her cheeks flushed. Had he said something wrong? No, she was blushing like he had complimented her, or done something that she claimed was particularly thoughtful. He ran a hand through his spiky tresses, then glanced up to find Aruka with a wide, knowing smirk pasted on his features. Was it an inside joke that he had missed? You two go make sure that you have everything ready for tomorrow. No, Aruka said, holding up a placating hand towards them. Both Naruto and Hinata had opened their mouths to protest at the same time. Let me clean up. You both have a hard day tomorrow. Several hard days if the last set of exams can be used as an indicator. I want you to go prepare, then get to sleep. We can say our farewells in the morning. He gave them his sternest, instructor look. Alright. Naruto sighed. He flashed Aruka a grin before turning to leave with Hinata. Thanks, Dad. He stopped in surprise for a split second before rushing from the kitchen with Hinata in tow, leaving a shell-shocked Aruka behind. What had possessed him to say that? Was that the first time you've ever called him that? Hinata asked as Naruto shut the door to his room. The way he stared. I think he was about to cry. I guess so. He laughed sheepishly. It had come out so naturally that even now it didn't sound wrong in his head. I guess what he said about families got to me. I mean, I know who my real dad was, but Aruka's the one who took me in and raised me. He's been around for over half my life now, so it's kind of like he is my dad in some ways, you know. Hinata paused in the act of lowering herself to sit on the edge of his bed, nibbling at the corner of her lips like she did when thinking. Nobody can replace the Yondaime as your father, of course, but you know that. Aruka-sensei. Though, I'm surprised that you haven't been calling him Dad all along. He's as kind and caring as any parent should be, and I know he loves you as if you were his own. Yeah, I guess it's past time I started calling him that, huh? He was quiet for a time, thinking while busying his hands with removing his kunai holster and belt to set them atop the dresser. There wasn't all that much to consider, he realized. He had adopted Aruka as his father long ago, just as Aruka had adopted him. It was a fact of everyday life now, only just verbally recognized. Shrugging out of his long coat and doffing the long-sleeved shirt, Naruto was halfway through unclipping his body armor when he heard a small cough. Glancing over one shoulder, he blinked at the sight of Hinata sitting on his bed, her face all but glowing red. What's up? She looked a little faint to him, as if she might be coming down with something. She started, swallowing once before quickly averting her eyes. And nothing. He raised an eyebrow, noting the stutter that so rarely infected her speech these days. The last clasp clicked open and he removed the chain vest, letting it fall to the ground with a clink before he turned fully to Hinata. Are you feeling sick? He asked, unable to keep the concern from lacing his tone. If you're not up to taking the exam tomorrow, we can always wait until next time. I know Sasuke's not impatient to become Chunin, and you know I don't mind. He took a step towards her, and wondered if her face had gained even more color. And no, she stammered, leaning back and raising her hands towards him as if to ward off his approach. I mean you're undressing. He blinked at her again, glanced down at his bare chest, then barked out a laugh. Hinata, you've seen Sasuke and me training shirtless countless times. Hell, we've always shared a tent on missions outside of the village, and I hardly ever sleep with my shirt on. It gets too hot, even in winter. He made a face, hoping his light commentary would help Hinata feel more comfortable. It was difficult to tell, but he thought it helped. A little. We're in your room, she insisted, squeezing her eyes shut. Together. He wasn't sure what difference that made, but she went on before he could say as much. In training is one thing, but in the tents I've always been a little uncomfortable. Well, not uncomfortable, but it was awkward for me. And now we're here and you're just. She trailed off, one eye half open now as she peered through her spread fingers at him. Naruto shook his head. He didn't understand at all, but if it made her feel better, he'd put on a shirt until she went to her own room. Snatching open a drawer, he snatched the first t-shirt he saw before turning to hold it up to her. It was plain white with the Uzumaki clan symbol embroidered on the front. Hinata had presented it to him on his last birthday, and after some questioning had admitted to doing the embroidery herself. The symbol was a bit lopsided, and a few of the lines were more wavy than curved, and it was his favorite shirt. Putting it on. Sorry, Hinata. He had already shoved one arm into place before her voice stopped him. Wait, Hinata said quickly, and again he looked curiously towards her. This time he didn't find her face red at all. Instead she seemed focused, for some reason, and a little. Naruto couldn't decide why her eyes looked like they did when he was trying something dangerous. There wasn't anything to be concerned about that he could see. She patted the space next to her without taking her eyes from him, and it was then that he noticed her gaze was on his torso, not his face. Come here. Her tone was soft and steady now, far removed from its recent frantic sound. All right. he said slowly, not sure where the sudden change of mind had come from. 1 second she wanted him covered up, and then next she wanted him sitting right next to her and waiting to put the shirt on. They had been together for a long time, but he decided that it would be another long time until he understood her completely, a very long time. Naruto plopped down beside her and folded one leg under, leaving the other dangling from the bed so that he could face her. For a long moment she merely looked at him, staring and almost appearing like she was trying to see inside of him. Then, very slowly, she reached out and let her fingertips touch lightly against his chest. A chill ran up Naruto's entire body, starting in his toes and rising rapidly to the top of his head. Hinata's fingers trailed along his skin, and it took a few seconds for him to realize that she was tracing his scars. The major ones were easy enough to see. The curve of pale, jagged tissue arcing from his right shoulder to right hip was the most obvious, and she traced it with the same amount of care she might use in caressing a newborn. Slowly, methodically she followed each line and old puncture wound, lingering on some more than others, though following no pattern that Naruto could see. She found her way to his left bicep and brushed the pallid skin there with a touch gentle enough to have been mistaken for an alighting butterfly. At last her fingers trailed back to his chest to rest over his heart, her palm pressing against the hard muscles there as if to feel for his heartbeat. "Everything's going to be okay this time," she said at last, moving towards him to lean her forehead against his chest. "It will be." It sounded to Naruto like she was still trying to convince herself of that instead of pronouncing it as true. His arms went around her of their own accord, and he pulled her close into a firm, steady embrace. He understood now what she had been about earlier, at least, he thought he did. "I promised, remember," he said softly, resting his cheek atop her head. He felt her nod, and he was glad to realize that she was neither sad nor truly afraid. Worry he could understand. He worried for her safety almost every day, and certainly every moment of a mission. "Can I?" Hinata started, her words a muted mumble against his chest. Would it be okay if? Naruto lifted and tilted his head down to blink at what he could see of her. Abruptly she raised her eyes to his, and she was very clearly flushing through a determined expression. "I want to sleep here tonight," she finished in a rush. He could nearly feel the heat coming from her cheeks, but he knew that his own must look similar. Yeah, of course you can," he answered lamely, lifting a hand to rub at the back of his neck. He grinned and shrugged, trying to act like it wasn't a big deal, even though he had felt his heart rate speed up on the instant. They were just going to be sharing a bed. They had done that plenty of times, on accident. It hadn't ever been discussed, anyway. It had just happened, and neither of them thought anything of it the day after outside of an awkward laugh here or there. His mind wandered to the memories received from one clone in particular, and he felt his face heat up even more. It was difficult to even consider breaking eye contact at that point. The temporary embarrassment faded quickly enough, but a different kind of heat replaced that of burning cheeks. A sort of tension that Naruto had never felt before now existed between them, like a tightly wound cord ready to snap at the slightest increase in pressure. Only, it wasn't a bad feeling, although Naruto couldn't quite decide if it was good either. It was just there, filling the space between them thicker than any killing intent he had ever felt. His heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of his chest. While the odd force built, Naruto found his thoughts bouncing wildly around, though always on similar topics. All of the times he and Hinata had been in close proximity seemed to flash through his mind, every kiss and touch emphasized tenfold. He found himself remembering what it was like seeing her hurt badly in the last Chunin exam in her fight with Neji, how he had anguished within his own subconscious at the thought of never seeing her again while he had been dying. Every memory was a blur, but each carried with it a similar theme: need. A need to keep Hinata alive and to stay alive for her. A need to be close to her. A need to share everything with her. His feelings, his affections, his experiences. Above all else there was a need to tell her all of that need, but an almost mocking knowledge that communicating something so profound was impossible. All at once the tension broke, and before he knew what was happening she had all but leapt for him a fraction of a second before he had been able to move towards her. Hinata had always been faster than him. Quick, hot breath preceded her lips, and they felt like fire on his own. For once he ignored every time one of his fangs scratched her tongue, instead enjoying the familiar semi-sweet metallic taste that came along with each happening. He tasted it on her neck as well. Her neck. How had he gotten there? It didn't matter. Everything felt constraining, as if the air itself was pressing in on their bodies. It felt like there was a furnace beneath his own skin. Some time later Naruto pushed himself back on shaking arms, panting for air while staring down at Hinata. She lay on her back beneath him, her own breath coming rapidly and causing her chest to rise and fall in a way that made him feel decidedly good, for some reason. Her ivory skin held a sheen of sweat wherever he looked, which he realized was more places than he had been able to see before. One of the shoulder straps to her bodice had slipped, or been pulled. He couldn't remember. To one side and down her arm a bit, giving him a view from that position that increased his already present flush. He could feel the silken skin of her waist against his wrist from where he had propped himself back up, when had her chainmail and undershirt been pulled loose. Her dark tresses were spilled over his other hand, which was held pressed into the pillow by the side of her head. The pillow. Pillow. The realization of their current position struck him like a fist, but he couldn't have moved away if he had wanted to. No matter what propriety demanded, he certainly didn't want to. Hinata's eyes were hot alabaster pools, and for the first time he understood what Aruka had meant the one time he had mentioned a man being able to drown in a woman's eyes. Naruto felt like he really could fall into those beautiful eyes. The heat behind them might very well pull him in on its own. I think. Hinata began breathlessly, and he gave a start. Her voice breaking the silence seemed to banish the blanket of pressure from around them as quickly as it had come on. I think I should get changed in my room. Her chest still rose and fell faster than usual, but it was well on its way back to a normal rhythm. Ninja training had many uses outside of combat. Yeah, definitely, he said quickly, almost tripping over his own words and self, as he scrambled off of Hinata. He was a bit ashamed to be relieved at finding that she was no less hurried in slipping from his bed and dashing from the room. That feeling had been mutual, then. Naruto nearly fell to the bed before remembering the fresh layer of perspiration covering his face. Really? How long had they been doing that? Really, they had only kissed. He knew that. Sure, there had been some nibbling involved as well. He felt at a tender pinprick on his neck, pulling his fingers away to find flecks of red. Okay, maybe a little more than nibbling. He hoped that he had not inadvertently done the same to her. She couldn't heal like he could. He hopped out of bed and entered the adjoining bathroom between their two rooms, quickly washing his face in the sink and patting down the rest of himself with a clean towel. No sooner had he closed the door coming back to his room than he heard Hinata's side open and the sink turn on. It seemed she had come to the same conclusion he had. Nobody liked sleeping while sweaty. He tossed back the covers of his bed and slid between the sheets, closing his eyes and trying to calm his pulse the rest of the way back down. Honestly, it couldn't have been that long. Hours of sparring couldn't get him this riled up. Girls are magical, he decided then, though after a moment corrected his own thoughts to, Hinata is magical. She came in mere minutes later, switching off the light and padding over in the pitch blackness. He could feel her standing beside the bed for a few seconds, like the residue of that pressure left over from before. Before he knew it, she was pulling the comforter up over them both and settling in beside him, the warmth from her body immediately felt in the closed space. Neither of them said a word. For some reason it felt as if they had already said everything that needed to be said, even if that seemed crazy. Another chill ran through Naruto when Hinata's arm snaked over his chest, resting there as she settled against him. He heard a soft, contented sound near his shoulder that sounded as sleepy as he felt. He smiled, lifting the arm on the other side of her so that he could take her hand. Moving to his side so that he could sleep facing her would have been nice, but he didn't have the heart to shift her from comfort. Good night, Hinata. Sleep well. He drifted off almost immediately, but not before deciding that it wasn't too warm after all. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.